Part 4. Evolution begins with Resident Evil. Author, Wei Tongmiao. Chapter 31. While Luo Guang and his men were dealing with the Death Tyrant, Carlos and Tyrell were taking Dr. Bud to play an exciting Research Institute adventure. First, they accidentally entered a wasp nest, and just after killing one, they were immediately chased by more than a dozen giant wasps. Carlos and Tyrell took Dr. Bud, and they did not dare to confront them head-on. They covered Dr. Bud while running away, but in the end, they accidentally ran into the underground research institute of Raccoon City University, and then experienced giant sharks infected with the T-virus, giant moths and other monsters infected with the T-virus. In order to protect Dr. Bud, Carlos and the others also suffered a lot, which made Tyrell doubt whether his previous choice was correct. He should take Dr. Bud directly to Luo Guang. Although he did not have to face the tyrant-type biological weapons that Dr. Bud was afraid of, Carlos felt that these mutant monsters in front of him were also difficult to deal with. These infected monsters could also be eliminated by bullets, but these monsters were very agile, and he had to protect Dr. Bud, which made him feel mentally tired. Moreover, since the day before yesterday, Carlos and Tyrell basically have not received any ammunition supplies, and the assault rifle ammunition, which was not abundant to begin with, has gradually run out. Carlos's assault rifle still has 2 magazines of bullets, while Tyrell's assault rifle only has 1.5 magazines that Carlos gave him for emergency use. Now Tyrell can only move forward with a pistol. Of course, Carlos and the others did not gain nothing. They searched for a large number of research documents in the institute, and behind each experimental data were bloody lives. Damn, this researcher named Greg actually did so many bad things. Carlos could not understand professional things, but he could also see how inhumane the experimental process was. He was so angry that he punched the black screen of the computer next to him. Bud, are you also? Although Tyrell did not think he was a good person, when he saw Greg's experimental report, Tyrell felt like an angel at this time. No, 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 I can't do such a thing, Dr. Bud shouted in injustice. Although he developed the T-virus vaccine based on a large number of human experiments, those who were experimented on by him were already infected with the T-virus. To be honest, without the vaccine, those infected with the T-virus were basically sentenced to death, so Bud did not feel guilty or other uneasy emotions. It seems that the man named Greg did not have a change of heart, but just wanted to join a more powerful force and complete his own research under his own leadership. Carlos said angrily, should we save such a person and leave Raccoon City? At this time, Carlos and the other 2 were in a laboratory, and the creatures infected with the T-virus in the room had naturally been cleaned up, so the 3 people who were temporarily safe would chat here. Then can't we fail to save him? As for the vaccine, Dr. Bud is here anyway, we just need to protect Bud. Tyrell thought of a countermeasure instantly. Failure? Tyrell, what do you mean? Carlos instantly understood what Tyrell meant, but he was not sure whether Tyrell really thought so. Tyrell didn't say anything. He nodded and focused his attention on Bud. Carlos followed and looked at Bud. What are you looking at me for? He did it. Bud's scalp was numb when he was looked at by the 2. He quickly said that he and Greg Mueller were not the same kind of people. He said, I am a researcher, but I am a person first, and he is a madman who calls himself a genius. Greg Mueller's research report was full of narcissism. He thought that Umbrella only valued William Birkin's G-virus research, so he had the idea of betraying Umbrella and looking for his own mentor to continue his genius research. In that case, why don't we change the plan? Carlos said, it is still the first priority to ensure our safety and escape from this ghost place, but we can also do a few things along the way. The first is to collect information, formulas, ingredients, etc. about the vaccine developed by Greg. Although this guy is a madman, the data and other information he has studied are still useful. It should also promote the development of vaccines, right? After Carlos finished speaking, he looked at Bud. Bud nodded and replied, "I read a few pages. It is indeed useful for developing vaccines, especially for studying the activity of the T-virus, so leave this to me. However, we will focus on collecting information for the time being. Pay attention to documents with words such as vaccines and lists, and analyze them after escaping Raccoon City." Carlos and Tyrell nodded. The second task will be handed over to Tyrell. "Do you have any ideas?" Carlos was referring to the failed task of rescuing Greg. Tyrell understood what Carlos meant, so he did not confirm Carlos's decision. Instead, he asked, "What about Luo Guang? Should we tell him directly or keep it a secret? I don't think he will care too much. Besides, if we don't tell him, who would know that we killed Greg?" It was not Carlos, but Bud who raised his hand and said, Tyrell did not refute immediately, but asked Carlos, "Carlos, you have more contact with Luo Guang, what do you think?" Carlos tilted his head, thought for a while, and then said, "I don't know. When he and Jill first quarreled, it was Luo Guang who smoothed things over between them, but at that time he didn't think Luo Guang did this because he was from UBCS. This could be said to be Luo Guang's disguise." This chapter is not over, please click on the next page to continue reading. But later, Luo Guang accepted Captain Victor's insurance mission. This move to ensure the smooth operation of the subway and rescue civilians made Carlos think that although Luo Guang was an intelligence agent for Umbrella, he was not absolutely loyal to Umbrella. From the company, or in other words, Luo Guang still has a righteous side. Carlos continued to think, and neither Tyrell nor Bard interrupted Carlos. Afterwards, Gil came back from completing the mission, but Luo Guang did not come back. Gil said that he was surrounded by zombie dogs, and at this time Luo Guang appeared. In order to save himself, he was scratched by the zombie dogs and infected with the virus. In the end, the two separated. At this time, Carlos was surprised by Luo Guang's behavior of saving Jill, and also expressed respect for Luo Guang, a hero who saved the beauty. However, thinking of Luo Guang's identity as an intelligence agent of Umbrella Company, Carlos was not sure about Luo Guang's position. Later, he saw Luo Guang in Raccoon City General Hospital. Although he was shocked, he could accept it after Luo Guang explained that he had been vaccinated. Carlos recalled what happened after he met Luo Guang again at Raccoon City General Hospital. The main point was to let Dr. Bader give him a lecture. It seemed that it was Luo Guang's initiative to let Dr. Bader do what Umbrella did in Raccoon City. Tell yourself the bad things. Although there are still things he doesn't understand, such as does Luo Guang know what kind of bastard researcher Greg Muller is? However, Carlos could confirm one thing and said, but one thing can be confirmed. Luo Guang also hated the bad things done by Umbrella Company. It was Luo Guang who took the initiative to ask Dr. Bader to tell me that Umbrella Company was in Raccoon City. Things I've done. Indeed, and I just showed a little desire to study the impact of the T-virus on a single insect species, and Luo Guang glared at me with a cold look. Bud said to himself that Luo Guang would not mind researcher Greg. The reason for the death of such a person is stated. Luo Guang's cold eyes were actually Bard's misunderstanding. Luo Guang was still in a fighting state at that time, so his eyes were cold and murderous. The reason why he turned back to look at Bard was because Bard's gaze was too fanatical. That's why Luo Guang's attention was caught, and he turned back to confirm the situation. In that case, I'm relieved. Tyrell breathed a sigh of relief and said jokingly, Dr. Bard, are you done with your rest? We have to hurry up, otherwise Luo Guang will have to give me a break because I didn't go to support him. Axe. Shortly after Carlos and the other three set out again, the situation on Luo Guang's side finally turned for the better. Not long after, Gil and Kevin, who were exhausted, withdrew from the battlefield one after another. The Death Tyrant, like an invincible Xiaoqiang, suddenly lost power and fell back with a roar. What's going on? Kevin did not approach rashly, but asked Jill, who had experience in dealing with tyrants. It's not likely that he was killed. It's most likely that the self-healing wound consumed too much energy, and it fell into dormancy for a while, just like human shock, Jill replied, causing George, who was about to step forward to study the death tyrant, to stop. Just as George was about to say something, he heard 3 gunshots, which startled George. It was Luo Guang who fired 3 more 9mm bullets at the death tyrant's head. After Luo Guang fired 3 shots and saw that the death tyrant had no reaction, he said, "Gil is probably right, but it's only temporary. Who knows about this monster? Why did he suddenly come back to life? In that case, I won't be polite." George breathed a sigh of relief and popped out a syringe-shaped object from his pocket. He walked towards the death tyrant, found a place without hard skin protection and inserted the syringe. "What is he doing?" Luo Guang asked when he saw that Jill and others did not stop George's behavior. "After we arrived at Raccoon City University, we didn't find an evacuation team. Judging from the announcements left behind, the military has cancelled the evacuation point here." Marvin came to Luo Guang and explained to Luo Guang what happened when Luo Guang was away. "What happened?" "Then we searched around Raccoon City University for a few times but couldn't find anyone. Finally, Greg Muller himself appeared in front of us, and then he wanted to play a game with us." "Game?" Luo Guang suddenly thought of someone who also likes to play games, pointed to the tyrant lying on the ground, and said, "Death Tyrant." "Yes, this Death Tyrant was developed by Greg himself," Marvin continued, "and Greg appeared in front of us just to ask us to fight the Death Tyrant, a head-on battle." "Then you agreed?" Luo Guang asked strangely, "Isn't this necessary?" 3 things are needed to make the T-virus vaccine that was developed. The first material is V-poison, and the second material is something called P-base sample, and we have obtained both of these materials. George said while drawing blood. "This formula is written on a document left by a virology researcher named Peter that we found." When George mentioned the name Peter, his tone was a little heavy. Seeing that George didn't say what the third material was, and seeing what George was doing, Luo Guang pointed at George and guessed, "The third material is this guy's blood." To be precise, it is a special T-virus blood sample that still contains the original RNA fragment of the T-virus on the Death Tyrant. After George sucked the blood of the Death Tyrant with a syringe, he immediately moved away from the Death Tyrant who was lying there, and said to Luo Guang, "The T-virus on most of the infected creatures in Raccoon City has undergone huge mutations, so only the one on the Death Tyrant can be used. This chapter is not over yet, please click on the next page to continue reading." "Who is Peter?" Luo Guang didn't have much impression of this name. "Peter Jenkins, used to be my colleague who studied viruses with me, but later we parted ways because of different ideas." George hoped that more people would know how great Peter Jenkins had done, so he said, "It was him who developed a special medicine for treating T-virus in a very short time, the sunlight vaccine." "Not that crazy, Greg Mueller." It seems that the situation is a bit different from Luo Guang's memory. Someone at Raccoon City University did develop a vaccine, but it was not the researcher named Greg, but Peter Jenkins. Okay, Luo Guang thought it was normal that he remembered it wrong, so he didn't doubt anything. He nodded and asked, "So Greg also has the formula of the sunlight vaccine, and knows that you need the T-virus carried by this guy, so he came to you?" "That's right. He knows about the sunlight vaccine, and he shamelessly said that Peter stole his data." George was angry. As George said, Greg Mueller is a lunatic who claims to be a genius. He doesn't care about vaccines at all. To him, the Death Tyrant, which is praised as a work of art, is more important. Kevin, who had rested for a while, also came over and took over the conversation. With a disdainful look on his face, he looked down on Greg, who was not here, and said, "He was hiding well, and he came out to see us just to show off his ability and introduce us to the work of art he personally prepared, the Death Tyrant." "Is that so?" Luo Guang suddenly thought of the task he gave to Carlos, and quickly took out the walkie-talkie to contact Carlos, who was carrying out the task of finding Greg's researcher. Just as he was about to press the talk button on the intercom, Carlos called first. "Hey, Luo Guang, something terrible has happened. Researcher Greg is dead." Carlos sounded anxious. Evolution begins with Resident Evil. Author, Wei Tongmiao. Chapter 32. Luo Guang, Greg is dead. An unexpected message came from the intercom. Ah. Oh, he's dead. How did he die? Apart from the initial shock, Luo Guang's tone seemed very calm, which made Carlos feel that Luo Guang was gestating a storm. Luo, you don't sound too disappointed? He is a researcher of the T-virus vaccine. Carlos paused for a moment before replying to Luo Guang. I'm sorry, Carlos, I made a mistake. The person who developed the T-virus vaccine was not Greg Muller, but a virology expert named Peter Jenkins. Luo Guang did not hide it, and directly asked Carlos, admitting that he had mistaken the person who researched the vaccine. He continued, and we have found the T-virus vaccine formula studied by Dr. Peter ourselves. This is like this, it's really great. Carlos' tone was a little unnatural, as if he was relieved. Luo Guang naturally heard it, but Luo Guang didn't intend to ask further questions. The battle was over, and before Tyrell brought Dr. Bard to join them, Luo Guang thought that something might have happened. It's just that Luo Guang is not the leader of the two, nor does he belong to UBCS, so Luo Guang, who just takes advantage of his high position, cannot deal with them, and there is no need. Carlos, our bud, and Tyrell with you, right? Luo Guang continued without waiting for Carlos to answer. Then I will go with others to a place where vaccines can be synthesized. I haven't been there specifically. I'll tell you the approximate location, so come and join us. Wait a minute, Carlos replied hurriedly, one more thing. There may be people from the USS inside Raccoon City University. It was the USS who killed researcher Greg. You should also pay attention to your safety. Copy that. After Luo Guang replied, he told others about USS and Greg. Well, is Greg dead? George's reaction was duller than Luo Guang expected, and the others seemed more or less indifferent. In other words, if everyone didn't spit on the death of the hated researcher Greg, that would be regarded as good quality. U.S. Kevin, Marvin, Arendt, and David were more interested in the person who killed researcher Greg. Marvin, Elliot, and David were quite happy to see Luo Guang rejoining them without incident, but after the battle, Jill looked like I was unhappy. Luo Guang explained, and then briefly talked about the things and people he met after separation from Marvin and others. Are those two people from UBCS trustworthy? Kevin, like Jill before him, did not trust UBCS or the people at UBCS or Umbrella. Luo, he is also from Umbrella Company. Gil joined the conversation. Yes, Umbrella is full of traitors. Luo Guang didn't mind if Jill tried to tear him down, it was better than punching him directly. Is this something to be proud of? Kevin smiled and complained when he saw Luo Guang's proud look. For Kevin, who once wanted to join STARS, Jill's words about STARS still have a certain weight. Although Jill said unhappily that Luo Guang was from Umbrella, Kevin still keenly noticed that Jill I don't have any dislike for Luo Guang, so my attitude towards Luo Guang is pretty good. Police David's bleeding injury has been treated. Let's get vaccinated quickly. Cindy Lennox, a barmaid who helped David treat the wound, said anxiously. When Elliot heard what Cindy said, he took the initiative to help David up with Marvin. What's David's injury? Luo Guang asked as he followed the others to the vaccine synthesis room. David was already treating the wound when Luo Guang arrived. Luo Guang did not check David's wound because he wanted to join the battle. According to the intelligence, there were T-virus infected creatures and people from the USS at this time, so Luo Guang didn't know that Wei was way injured. Police David was injured to protect me, Cindy explained with a sad look on her face. At that time, the tyrant of death suddenly rushed out. It was David who pushed me away and took a paw for me. After 3 days of separation, Luo Guang looked at David with admiration. He didn't expect David to change so quickly. Hey, although David was in a bad mental state and seemed to have a fever, he still felt very happy when he heard Cindy talk about his heroic deeds. He smiled shyly and experienced the experience of being a policeman for the first time. Meaning. No wonder Luo Guang felt that Elliot and Marvin's attitudes towards David had changed. So David is infected by the T-virus. Luo Guang didn't pull out his gun nervously and stage a scene like taking precautions to kill the infected person in advance. Yes, Elliot replied, and then quickly said, but we now have enough materials to synthesize the vaccine, so don't worry. Now that I have the vaccine, I can just give it to David. Luo Guang took out the vaccine that Dr. Bader gave him, handed it to Cindy, and asked Cindy to vaccinate David. Oh, Cindy was stunned for a few seconds when Luo Guang took out the vaccine without hesitation. Then she took the vaccine from Luo Guang's hand and asked Marvin and Elliot to put David back against the wall first. Sit back and study how to use this vaccine. Is this vaccine developed by Umbrella? George thought this was a benefit provided by Umbrella to Luo Guang, a staff member. This chapter is not over, please click on the next page to continue reading. Yes or no, this was researched by Nathaniel Bard, who works at Raccoon City General Hospital. Luo Guang said. Is it him? George said in surprise, I also work at Raccoon City General Hospital. Although I also specialize in virology, I am the chief surgeon. Although George had some suspicions when Luo Guang mentioned the name Bard, in George's perception, Nathaniel Bard was not the kind of person who would develop a vaccine and give it to others. Oh, you can chat later. Luo Guang looked like he was watching a good show. George really wanted to talk to Dr. Bud about viruses and vaccines, and Dr. Peter, whom both parties knew. The vaccine Bud gave Luo Guang was put in a syringe, so Cindy immediately figured out how to use it. While Luo Guang and George were chatting, Cindy had already injected David with the vaccine. Because David was infected not long ago, David's fever quickly began to subside after the injection. Although his body was still weak, his condition did improve. Seeing this, everyone started their journey to the vaccine synthesis room again. Jill and Luo Guang walked in the front, while Kevin and Marvin also walked behind. Because Elliot's hand was also injured, David, whose leg was injured, was now being supported by Alan and George. It just so happened that George also wanted to see up close how effective the vaccine developed by Bud was. Cindy followed the injured David, always ready to switch hands with Elliot to help David. Sorry. Gil still looked like he didn't want to talk to Luo Guang, so he had to start from Luo Guang's side. No, you have no reason to be sorry. Gil looked ahead and said calmly, on the contrary, it was my fault. If I hadn't slept to death, you wouldn't have gone to the hospital alone. Although Gil's tone was calm, Luo Guang still heard that Gil added an accent to the word privately. After Gil asked other people about it, he learned that Luo Guang had entered the bedroom to look for him again before leaving, but he was obviously still asleep at that time. Moreover, it was rare for him to sleep so deeply that he didn't even notice that Luo Guang straightened his body, took off his shoes and covered himself with the quilt. Thinking of exposing her unprotected sleeping face to Luo Guang, Jill couldn't help but feel a little shy. The reason why I said I'm sorry is not because of this. Luo Guang directly opened up a new track and said, I mean that I gave you so many suggestions and made you ready, but in the end, I took away what you had to do. Luo Guang did not repeat the explanation he gave to Marvin to Jill. And Luo Guang saw some signs of the frost on Jill's face thawing, and continued to add fuel to the fire, saying, anyway, I didn't tell you right away, and I acted alone without telling you, which made you worry. Gil didn't expect Luo Guang to say that. He skipped the probing and pulling process and directly saw through the point where he was really angry. In the end, Jill could only turn her head to the side, curled her lips, and said, who is worried about you? Don't be too arrogant. Soon, Gil turned back and looked at Luo Guang, with a trace of tenderness flashing in his eyes, and whispered, "But, it's good that you know." Luo Guang breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the ice and snow melting on Jill's face. The reason why Luo Guang chose this time to talk to Jill was because Luo Guang felt that in this situation where he needed to be alert to his surroundings, Jill could remain calm and rational enough. Finally, after Luo Guang seriously expressed his deep introspection and said that he would not hide it from Jill next time, Jill finally had a smile on his face. Not long after, under the leadership of Jill, Luo Guang and others arrived at a laboratory on the third floor of Raccoon City University. "That's the synthesis machine for making vaccines." Gil pointed out the location of the vaccine synthesis machine to Luo Guang and said. "Then let's start George's professional performance, right?" Luo Guang nodded and said to George behind him. "That's right, let the professionals come," George said. After he and Elliot put the injured David in place, he said to Cindy, "Cindy, bring the materials and come here to help." Because Cindy never had to participate in the battle, the raw materials for the vaccine that Jill and others had obtained were given to Cindy for safekeeping. Speaking of which, Cindy's clothes don't seem to be medical related. Does she also know how to do medicine? After Luo Guang reported his location to Carlos through the walkie-talkie, he looked at George curiously and asked Cindy to help, and then thought of Cindy before. He asked about helping David take care of his wounds. Cindy is working part-time to make money and is preparing to apply for medical college in order to distract David. Cindy talked to David about many things while treating David. So David knew Cindy's goal and told him Luo Guang. Oh, so George and Cindy met because of their medical studies. Luo Guang noticed that the tone of George and Cindy's conversation was calmer and gentler than when chatting with other people. That's not true. George often goes to the bar where Cindy works to drink. It just so happens that Cindy wants to learn about medical knowledge and other things, and he becomes familiar with it after going back and forth. David told Luo Guang the information he knew without hesitation. Luo Guang nodded, then asked Jill and others, "Is there any communication equipment here, or something that can be used to alert helicopters in the air?" Marvin shook his head and said, "Neither Kevin nor I have seen it." Kevin nodded and agreed with Marvin, "There is a laboratory in the sewer of this university, but the instruments in it are incomprehensible to us. In the end, we just got the pee sample from the laboratory and left." This chapter is not finished yet. Please click on the next page to continue reading the exciting content. Where's Jill? From what Marvin and Kevin said, they probably acted separately from Jill and others. There is a radio room that I have contacted, but no one has heard it yet. Gil was exploring the university alone, and soon found a radio station. Although the signal was not far away, as mentioned before, this Raccoon City University is located on the main road exiting Raccoon City. As long as a rescue helicopter passes by, it is very likely to be contacted. "How about we go to the road to check the situation and find a car to leave?" Marvin suggested. "Well, let's go take a look when the vaccine is ready," Arendt also echoed. "If there is a helicopter passing by in the sky, in addition to broadcasting, we can also use grenades, flash bombs, smoke bombs, and other items to create noise." Carlos has not joined us yet. There are many of them. Luo Guang prepared a message for everyone. Plan B. After everyone chatted for a while, Carlos took Tyrell and Bud to the vaccine synthesis room, and people from both sides finally gathered together. Luo Guang is still the lubricant between UBCS and others, and the others headed by Stars Gil. When the two parties met, Luo Guang first introduced, "These two are Carlos and Tyrell from UBCS. Although they are mercenaries of Umbrella Company, they were also unaware of this disaster and were captured by UBCS. Law Company arranged tasks such as rescuing civilians and cleaning up zombies, but unfortunately, after completing the tasks, they all ended up being abandoned and cannon fodder by Umbrella Company. And this Bud is the same as Dr. Peter who developed the vaccine." "Wait a minute, Luo, why do you call Peter doctor, but you don't add a prefix to my name?" I've also developed a vaccine, Dr. Bud protested. We are familiar with each other, and Dr. Peter has sacrificed his life. When you die, I will definitely give you the title of Dr. Luo Guang said while observing the reactions of the people around him. There was no reaction on everyone's faces. Carlos and others had a special antipathy. Don't interrupt me, this Bard has also developed a vaccine, and has successfully mass-produced a lot of it. The vaccine that saved David before was given to me by this Dr. Bard. Luo Guang mentioned Bard's vaccine. After saving David, Luo Guang added the prefix Dr. to Bud's name. Luo Guang concluded, these three people couldn't stand the evil deeds of Umbrella Company, so they all turned to the dark side. Luo, you seem to be an intelligence agent for Umbrella Company. Kevin touched the beard on his chin and confirmed. Yes, the four of us are the infamous Betrayer Squad. Luo Guang's words were full of flaws, but most people were stunned when they heard Luo Guang claiming to be notorious. Only Tyrell burst into laughter and suddenly left. The traitor team coincided with the traitor quartet he had thought of before, which made him laugh. Oh, Luo, please be more serious. Gil held his forehead and shook his head, suddenly feeling that cracks were beginning to appear in Luo Guang's original image in his heart. Jill, I am sacrificing myself for the sake of team harmony. Luo Guang put away his smile and suddenly became serious, saying, everyone knows more or less what Umbrella did in Raccoon City. I also understand that some people find it difficult to accept UBCS or people like me who are labeled as Umbrella. Luo Guang said this and glanced at Kevin, who was careless. That's right. Kevin noticed Luo Guang's gaze and admitted generously. That's why I say this, to break everyone's stereotype. Not all people in Umbrella are bad people, just like there are scum like Police Chief Brian Irons in the Raccoon City Police Department. Luo Guang seemed to be explaining to everyone, but in fact Luo Guang said this while looking at Jill, in order to restore his image in Jill's mind. But just when Jill was about to say something, a tone suddenly sounded in the room. The daylight vaccine is ready. George, who was looking at the vaccine synthesizer intently, looked at the prompt that the synthesis was successful, took out the container storing the daylight vaccine, looked at the white lit liquid in the container, and announced. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Evolution begins with Resident Evil. Author, Wei Tongmiao. Chapter 33. Daylight Vaccine. The name fits perfectly with the milky white liquid in the test tube in front of me. The milky white vaccine emits a faint white light, just like a ray of light appearing in this dark hell, able to illuminate the hope of those living people who are about to turn into corpses due to infection. It would be great if the previous owner of Kendo Gun Store had such a bottle of vaccine. Gil looked at the vaccine and thought of his old friend, Boss Kendo, who customized the standard pistols for STARS and others. Okay, now we face a terrifying monster like the Death Tyrant again, and we have a killer weapon that can kill it with one hit, Luo Guang said without reaching out to ask for the vaccine. Except for the monster that William Birkin became after being injected with the G-virus, Luo Guang added in his mind. After Luo Guang learned that his system could use the T-virus to evolve, he once asked the system if he wanted to take this opportunity to try to use the G-virus to strengthen himself. The system did not understand the G-virus that Luo Guang mentioned, but after learning about the various forms of the G-virus that Luo Guang took after injecting William Birkin, and the need to find his own blood relatives for reproduction, the system gave the G-virus an unavailable evaluation. Later, the system also warned Luo Guang that it was best to stay away from the G-virus. The system's explanation was that Luo Guang's current physical data and the combat effectiveness of the T-virus in his body were simply unable to control the uncontrollable mutation of the G-virus. Luo Guang only asked briefly, but this was the first time the system had given him such a serious warning, so Luo Guang still followed the system's advice. This was one of the reasons why Luo Guang followed Marvin and others out of the police station. Huh? Deal with that tyrant of death. George was distracted by Luo Guang's words, but this did not prevent George from opening up new ideas and falling into deep thought. When Kevin heard George's words, his first reaction was to ask, "The death tyrant is not dead. Wasn't he knocked down by us?" "Luo Guang, you still shot." Probably, maybe not dead yet." Luo Guang is not sure whether the tyrants in this world will follow the law of conservation of energy, and Luo Guang now feels that unless he crushes the tyrants to ashes, he cannot be sure that those monsters are 100% dead. Thinking of this, Luo Guang gave an example and said, "Anyway, the nemesis that Jill and I met before was also a tyrant-type biochemical weapon. It was knocked down by 2 rockets from Carlos. I was also knocked down." He replenished his gun, but soon he came to cause trouble again. "Yes, I feel like if I don't crush those tyrant-type monsters to ashes, I always feel like they will get up and catch up at any time." Luo Guang said this, and Jill also recalled the terrifying and oppressive goddess of vengeance. Obviously, he usually doesn't move very fast, but he can always suddenly come to the place next to him and chase him. "Then we will give the death tyrant another shot later." Kevin saw that George had extracted 3 doses of sunlight vaccine from the vaccine synthesizer. He thought it should be on the safe side, so he said, "Dr. Bud also has vaccines, so count them. There should be a lot of remaining vaccines that have just been synthesized, so I think it's cost-effective to split one out to eliminate hidden dangers. But that's just a theory." Luo Guang didn't want to mislead others, so he added. At this time, George and Bud also joined the discussion. Actually, the trump card Luo Guang just mentioned is indeed theoretically valid. After hearing Luo Guang and others talking about their professional fields, Dr. Bader joined in with excitement and said, "But it depends on the vaccine type of action. My vaccine takes a certain amount of time to take effect and restore infected people to health. It is a relatively stable type, and I have not conducted experiments on biological and chemical weapons." Bud is right. Judging from the sunlight vaccine I researched on Peter, it should directly target the T virus in the organism, and it is a relatively fierce direct killing method. George had worked with Peter before, so the two had exchanges on their respective understandings of virology. When it came to viruses, they naturally talked about eliminating them. For the same unknown virus, Peter's idea is to sterilize it efficiently and eliminate the virus before it does more damage to the body, even if it causes some damage to the body. On the contrary, George prefers to allow the body to produce antigens and antibodies on its own while suppressing the reproduction of viruses, and finally eliminate the invading viruses through the immune system or naturally eliminate the inactivated viruses from the body through the excretion system. In the end, the two of them parted ways due to disagreements over their ideas, but both felt that the other was a respectable opponent, which is why Dr. Peter left a message for his rival George on the message wall at the extraction point in the underground parking lot of the Raccoon City Police Department. Vaccine information. Judging from George's understanding of Peter and the research information he found on the daylight vaccine, it is indeed very likely that the daylight vaccine developed by Dr. Peter uses the powerful elimination of the T virus as the main way to fight infection. From this point of view, the daylight vaccine is not only the nemesis of the death tyrant studied by Greg Mueller, but can also be used to deal with other biochemical weapons developed based on the T virus. George briefly explained the principle of the sunlight vaccine. The sunlight vaccine can destroy the T virus in those monsters, which is equivalent to disintegrating the monster's life from the root. It just means pulling the firewood out of the cauldron, Luo Guang thought. That's right. Bard crossed his hands on his chest and agreed, those biochemical weapons, or the various monsters you have seen, are so huge that under normal circumstances, the heart and other internal organs cannot grow normally. The body size provides energy or oxygen, and the existence of the T virus makes this possible, so if these monsters do not have the T virus to strengthen their internal organs, etc., basically these mutant T virus infected organisms or artificially manufactured biochemical weapons will start from the inside. collapse and eventually lose your life. This chapter is not finished yet, please click on the next page to continue reading the exciting content. What you said is too complicated, and we don't quite understand it. Kevin scratched his head, but as long as he was sure of the most important point, he asked, anyway, Luo Guang is talking about dealing with the Death Tyrant or other T-viral monsters are possible, right? That's all we need to know now. Marvin, Elliot, and David were confused and nodded quickly. It's feasible seeing that no one was very interested, Bud and George could only suppress their teacher spirit and concluded. Moreover, it is more interesting to discuss it with professionals than to explain it to others who do not understand viruses. The two virology experts looked at each other, their eyes seemed to be filled with researchers' enthusiasm, and they ignored the others. They asked Luo Guang and others to tell them after discussing the next plan, and then the two sat aside. Discussed quietly but enthusiastically. Then what should we do now? Should we go to the broadcast room to see if we can contact rescue? Marvin is very experienced in contacting rescue. Seeing that the discussion about vaccines has been finished, he looked at Luo Guang, who was sitting with Jill, asked. Marvin is also one of the people that Kevin respects, so when Kevin saw that Marvin seemed to trust Luo Guang, he let go of his wariness towards Luo Guang and looked at Luo Guang, wanting to hear Luo Guang's kudos to you. Wait a minute, let me confirm something first. Luo Guang was just a social beast before time travel. He was only a novice when it came to arranging troops or commanding battles. The reason why he commanded Carlos before was because Luo Guang had some knowledge about games. Intelligence information, so Luo Guang just made a simple deployment based on this and some information on the scene. This is why when facing the goddess of vengeance, Luo Guang basically acted with Jill in mind instead of taking the initiative to direct the battle. The system has sufficient theoretical knowledge and computing power, but it can basically only rely on Luo Guang to collect intelligence. At the same time, the system does not understand people's hearts and cannot predict the reaction of task executors in various situations, so Luo Guang does not letting the system make suggestions only allows the system to prepare a backup plan on its own basis to prevent certain things in this world from being different from the contents of the Resident Evil game, which would lead to major changes in Luo Guang's own plan. In fact, the fate of each survivor now is very different from the game plot. Luo Guang took a look at the people in the vaccine synthesis room. Most of them were the results of the flapping wings of his own butterfly. Luo Guang focused on Carlos and asked, you said before that someone from the USS killed researcher Greg Mueller, right? Although Luo Guang only confirmed once as a routine, it seemed to Carlos that he had other intentions. After all, Carlos himself, Tyrell, and Bart originally planned to let researcher Greg die. At this time, Luo Guang suddenly confirmed to himself whether it was the USS that was responsible. Could it be that he was hinting that he and the three of them were also suspected? Yes, Tyrell was older after all, so he answered Luo Guang's question for Carlos, while also thinking about Carlos in his heart. Luo Guang directly put Carlos as the first person to inquire, probably because Carlos had an easier breakthrough than him. With Tyrell thinking this way, he had completely put aside his contempt for the young Luo Guang. However, this was indeed not done by the three Tyrells. Carlos just felt guilty because he had also thought about killing Greg. Tyrell continued, there is a research institute hidden underground in this university. We are not familiar with the road. When we were chased by the giant wasp, we accidentally walked in and got lost inside, so we did not come to support you. Deal with the tyrant of death. Tyrell first explained why he did not bring Bard to join Luo Guang to deal with the death tyrant, and then explained to Luo Guang the location of the entrance to the underground research institute, showing that he was not afraid of Luo Guang going to personally confirm whether he was lying. Look. Luo Guang nodded and wrote down the important information about the entrance location of the underground research institute, which might be used in the future. Seeing how calm Tyrell was, Carlos also calmed down. He continued what Tyrell said and said, "Yes, we were the one who accidentally ran into the research institute when we were chased by the giant hornet. Encountered big sharks and all kinds of monsters, and then we found traces of Greg while looking for a way out. Yes, maybe it was because of the UBCS armbands Carlos and I were wearing. The other person ran away as soon as he saw us. Of course, we immediately ran after Greg, and then followed him and ran out of the underground research institute. We were in a meeting. He caught up with the other party in a room or a multi-purpose hall," Tyrell recalled. "It was in that room that the USS man hid in the ventilation duct above and shot him at the vent. Hit Greg's heavenly spirit cap. Is there only one person who carried out the assassination? And he happened to be hiding above that room," Luo Guang asked, thinking. "Yes, and the other party did not attack us. They ran away after killing us with one blow," Tyrell said. As for Luo Guang's second question, Carlos answered, "That room seems to be an office and laboratory of researcher Greg. Dr. Bud said there are many research reports on the T-virus in it. Forget it, as long as you are fine, but the other party USS did not attack you. In this case, the other party may not want to cause trouble and leave after completing the mission, unless..." Luo Guang did not care about Greg's death. He was more concerned about whether the USS was still in Raccoon City University. "You mean, Dr. Bud," Carlos thought of the body of the USS in Raccoon City General Hospital. Luo Guang nodded and said, "Based on the current time, Umbrella must know that the USS in Raccoon City General Hospital was annihilated and the mission failed. Is it because there was no report, so it is considered a mission failure?" Jill, who was listening carefully, interrupted. "Yes, although the USS is hiding in the vents and has limited vision, it is possible that the USS still saw Bud." Luo Guang did not think that he was the chosen one and was used to making the worst plan. Jill's expression was a little solemn. Bud, who could develop vaccines, needed to be alive. After all, the vaccine in Bud's hand could be mass-produced, which was more practical than the sunlight vaccine. Although Luo Guang said that Bud's vaccine was not 100% effective, mass production was more important than quality now, whether for the people who were still alive in Raccoon City or when they encountered a biochemical crisis again in the future. Jill had a hunch that in the future, such biochemical crises would become more and more frequent worldwide. Since this is the case, it will be troublesome," Luo Guang said. "The enemy is in the dark and we are in the light, but we can only respond to changes with the same approach. The primary goal is to leave Raccoon City." Luo Guang thought quickly and confirmed that the only available people were himself, Jill, Marvin, Kevin, Carlos and Tyrell. What needs to be done is to try to contact for rescue in the broadcasting room, and to protect Bud and George, especially Bud. If there is still a need, it is to prepare to attract the passing rescue troops or rescue helicopters, but if there is a radio station available, this is not necessary for the time being. Kevin and I will go to the broadcasting room and use the radio to contact for support. "I am familiar with this," Marvin took the initiative to say when he saw Luo Guang thinking. "I will come with you." Tyrell took the initiative to introduce himself, saying, "I am also familiar with electronic communication equipment such as radio, and it is too dangerous for only 2 people. Kevin, who had the MP5 submachine gun on his shoulder, stood up after hearing Marvin's words. After hearing Tyrell's words, he glanced at Tyrell and took the MP5 submachine gun in his hand. Tyrell also responded with bright white teeth, patted the M401 assault rifle in his hand, and smiled. Luo Guang saw all this. Although Luo Guang acted as a clown to introduce the 2 people from UBCS to everyone, this could only ease the tension between the people, but could not make the people on both sides trust each other. If Tyrell had not lost his way at that time, and had fought against the death tyrant with everyone, perhaps there would be more trust between the 2 sides. In Tyrell's view, only Carlos, who was also from UBCS, could be trusted. Although Luo Guang was an intelligence officer of Umbrella and was normally the most loyal, in Tyrell's view, Luo Guang was the least loyal person to Umbrella among the four traitors. So Tyrell volunteered to prevent Marvin and others from abandoning him, and the reason why Carlos was not called was to protect Bud, prevent him from being abandoned, and act as a hostage. Kevin also saw a little bit, so he didn't say anything, and tacitly agreed to Tyrell to go to the broadcasting room together. The old man Marvin also saw it, but he didn't say anything either, as long as the two didn't hold each other back. So after Marvin confirmed the location of the broadcasting room with Jill, he called the two of them and went to the broadcasting room together. Evolution begins with Resident Evil. Author, Wei Tongmiao. Chapter 34. Luo, what are your plans for the future? Jill asked. Perhaps because he was safe for the time being and there was no goddess of vengeance chasing him, as long as he could contact the rescue, he and others would be safe, so Jill asked Luo Guang about his future plans. I don't know. Luo Guang shook his head, thinking that Jill was not allowed to say this, and replied. After being asked by Jill, Luo Guang began to think about the future. Finally, he remembered that he only had an umbrella company certificate. Apart from that, he had no money and no other certificates to prove his identity. Speaking of which, after escaping from Raccoon City, he would most likely be caught by the military that surrounded Raccoon City, right? He didn't know if he could make a living as a tainted witness. Luo Guang could actually bet that Umbrella didn't know about his betrayal, so that Luo Guang could still be a traitor at Umbrella and work to make money. By the way, being an undercover agent at Umbrella could also expose him to more types of viruses, which would also be beneficial to his evolution. After the system reminded him, Luo Guang remembered that he still had the choice of deliberately running to dangerous places to make himself evolve continuously. Luo Guang scratched the back of his head. He still had a lot of choices, so he didn't think about what to do after escaping Raccoon City. He asked Jill, "What about you, Jill? Continue to fight against biochemicals?" Yeah, Jill was very determined about this and said, "But as for how to do it specifically, I plan to go to Europe to discuss with Chris, but the first task is to defeat the scourge of Umbrella Corporation." Luo Guang and the other person discussed the future in a low voice, while others were chatting in twos and threes. Bud and George were still discussing the feasibility of a preventive vaccine for the T-virus, and Cindy was listening and nodding from time to time. David and Elliot, both injured, sat together to rest. Elliot patted David on the shoulder, as if praising David, and David also showed a shy smile on his face. As a result, Carlos found that he was the only one alone. For Carlos, who was more lively and frivolous, this atmosphere was a bit difficult to accept. After looking around, Carlos only knew Jill and Luo Guang, so he took the initiative to walk over and asked, "What are you talking about?" Things about the future. Although he was a little unhappy about being interrupted, Luo Guang still replied, "After all, I feel that I can almost escape from this Raccoon City." Oh. Speaking of which, after experiencing all these expensive things, I plan to find a way to return to South America. Seeing Luo Guang pick up his words, Carlos breathed a sigh of relief, sat aside, and talked about his thoughts. Originally, I was trying to escape, and finally had to join UBCS, but the water is even more turbid, and now I am dirty. Haha, I told you not to do research before looking for a job. Luo Guang teased Carlos and said, "But I think it was Umbrella Company that found you. With your status, it is most suitable to join UBCS as cannon fodder." "What did Carlos do before?" Jill asked curiously. Luo Guang. Although Carlos didn't think what he did before was shameful, it wasn't a glorious thing, so he didn't want others to know. "It's all in the past, don't be curious." Luo Guang naturally wouldn't say it. "Look, Carlos doesn't want people to know." Jill looked at Carlos, snorted, and said to Luo Guang, "If you don't want to tell me, then don't tell me." Seeing Jill like this, Luo Guang just felt interesting. He felt that Jill was more feminine now than when he first met Jill. The occasional smile on her heroic face made her even cuter. Seeing Jill so cute, Luo Guang unconsciously raised the corners of his mouth. Carlos on the side looked at Luo Guang, then at Jill, and seemed to finally understand why Luo Guang betrayed Umbrella. At the same time, he felt a pain in his heart, and suddenly felt that he seemed to have suffered some kind of sweet critical damage, and didn't want to talk for a while. Jill and the other two fell into silence strangely for a while. Fortunately, they contacted again soon, which resolved Carlos' embarrassment. "Swish, this is Marvin, please reply," over the voice came from Luo Guang's intercom. Marvin's voice sounded in the room, attracting everyone's attention to Luo Guang, or more precisely, to the intercom in Luo Guang's hand. "This is Luo Guang, received, please report the situation," over Luo Guang replied. "We have contacted the rescue helicopter, but it can only carry 9 people at most. Let's clean up the zombies in the square in front of Raccoon City University, which is the place where Raccoon City University was evacuated before, and wait for rescue." Marvin paused and finished the story in one breath. 9 people, Luo Guang said, "then let's go to the square in front of Raccoon City University to gather first." "Received," Marvin said, put down the intercom, and said to Kevin and Tyrell, who were glaring at each other behind him, "You all heard it, let's gather first. Luo Guang has injured people, and the zombies at the evacuation point should be dealt with by us first." Everyone on Luo Guang's side heard the conversation between Marvin and Luo Guang, picked up their things and prepared to set off. George had been to Raccoon City University before to give a professional speech, so he was the most familiar with the road among the crowd, so Luo Guang asked George to show him the way. Because they had to take care of David, who had a calf injury, the group did not move very fast. Luo Guang and Jill walked in front as before, and Elliot and other wounded people walked with George and Cindy. This chapter is not over yet, please click on the next page to continue reading. At this time, Cindy was holding a gun, while George and Elliot were supporting David forward. Carlos was naturally still responsible for the rear guard, but originally in the beta team of UBCS, Carlos was responsible for rear guard and fire support, so he could be said to be very good at this rear guard job. Because David had a leg injury, Luo Guang and others on the 3rd floor were much later than Marvin and others in the broadcasting room on the 3rd floor. It took nearly 7 minutes to arrive at the square in front of Raccoon City University. "Here we are, the zombies have been cleared." Tyrell used a pistol to deal with the last zombie, and heard the footsteps, turned back and said to Luo Guang and others, "Very good, can the rescue helicopter only save 9 people? Luo Guang confirmed, "The helicopter should be able to fit a few more people in, right?" At this time, the survivors at Raccoon City University are Luo Guang, Jill, Carlos, Tyrell, Bud, Marvin, Elliot, David, Kevin, George, and Cindy, a total of 11 people, which means that no matter what, there are people who have to wait for the next trip. I have already asked. Marvin also has the same idea as Luo Guang. It would be best if everyone can be taken away together, so he had already asked. Looking at Marvin's expression, it seems that it won't work, Luo Guang thought. This 9-person helicopter is already overloaded. Excluding the driver's seat, even the co-pilot is counted. Except for the 5 seats in the back, everyone else basically has to squeeze in the middle and be careful not to fall off the helicopter as Luo Guang expected. Marvin smiled bitterly. Carlos looked at Tyrell. Tyrell keenly noticed Carlos's gaze and nodded, indicating that Marvin's words were true. George and Cindy, the civilians, Bud, the vaccine researcher, Elliot, and David, the injured, are there any problems with them boarding the plane first? Luo Guang first confirmed the positions of the civilians and the injured. No, Jill answered immediately. Jill thought Luo Guang's arrangement was very reasonable. No, Marvin thought the same way, and Kevin, who was also a member of RPD, said in unison that there was no problem. After all, The mission of RPD was to protect civilians. No, Carlos thought about it and felt that there was no problem. Although he was a former UBCS, Carlos still wanted to complete the mission of protecting civilians, so he also said that he had no objection. Me neither. Others who were not in the first round had no objection, so Tyrell could only follow the crowd and answer that he had no objection. The two UBCS who stayed, the two RPD and Jill, all said that there was no problem, which made Luo Guang slightly relieved. When Luo Guang heard that only 9 people could sit, he actually had an idea in his mind. So after confirming that everyone else's suggestions on giving priority to civilians and the wounded were all right, Luo Guang did not speak out his own ideas directly, but planned to ask for someone's opinion. Luo Guang said to Jill, "Jill, I have an idea." "Go ahead." This time, Luo Guang told his plan directly, and specifically to himself, which gave Jill a certain hunch. "Let Marvin, Kevin, Carlos, and Tyrell get on the helicopter and evacuate first," Luo Guang said directly, and this statement also shut up Tyrell, who was ready to fight for a place on the helicopter for himself. Others were also stunned, and whether they were familiar with Luo Guang or not, they looked surprised. The civilian faction, the wounded faction, and Bud, as the beneficiary of the first round, did not speak at this time. This was not ungratefulness, but as vested interests, they could easily make people feel hypocritical when they said anything. "Shall I stay with you?" Jill was a little surprised that Luo Guang, who had always been aiming to escape from Raccoon City, actually gave the opportunity to evacuate to others first. "Wait, Luo Guang, I'll stay, you and Jill." Marvin paused. He didn't have the right to make decisions for Kevin or others. At the same time, Marvin somewhat understood why Luo Guang made such an allocation. There were 2 people from UBCS and 2 people from RPD, and Luo Guang and Jill could be temporarily regarded as people on one side. Although Luo Guang had previously smoothed the relationship between UBCS and RPD, no matter what, both sides would definitely not leave one person alone, so 2 of the remaining 4 positions were locked. With Marvin's many years of experience as a policeman, Carlos, one of the 2 UBCS, looked okay, but Tyrell would definitely strive for the opportunity to get on the helicopter in the first batch, that is, the people from UBCS would definitely not want to stay. If not, Marvin was worried that the other party would choose to use force to speak. This left 2 positions, but normally, ladies were given priority. Jill took 1 position, and the remaining ones were Luo Guang, Marvin, and Kevin. Kevin and the people from Umbrella don't get along, so in order to prevent the danger that may occur while waiting for the next helicopter, he should wait with Luo Guang and Jill, and Kevin can also hold down the 2 people from UBCS on the helicopter. This is the normal way of thinking, but Luo Guang let the civilians, the wounded, and Bud, an important person, go first, but didn't let Jill, a woman, go first. Why? This is the point that Marvin couldn't figure out. Luo. Unlike Marvin, Jill's first thought was the words of apology that Luo Guang had said to him. Thinking of this, Jill said with a firm look in his eyes, "Then Luo Guang and I will stay." Seeing that Luo Guang and Jill chose to stay and wait for the next trip, Tyrell couldn't help but feel a little ashamed of his little thoughts. After thinking about it, he handed the M401 assault rifle in his hand to Jill and said, "I probably won't use it later. You stay here and need it more than I do." Yes, seeing this, Carlos also took the initiative to unload the magazines and bullets needed for the M401 assault rifle and handed them to Jill. Then Carlos took out all the grenades and other throwing objects he had thrown before and gave them to Luo Guang and Jill respectively. "Jill, this is for you." George also handed his long-range injection gun to Jill, and said, "The previous sunlight vaccine was made in 3 copies, one of which I have put in here, just shoot it directly." George was worried that the death tyrant was just dormant as Luo Guang said, so he prepared a killer for the 2 of them, and added, "It is not the previous medicine bottle, but the syringe." At the same time, the shooting distance of this weapon is only about 5 meters, and one thing is very important, that is, it must be shot at the soft part of the enemy, otherwise if the needle can't penetrate the epidermis, the sunlight vaccine inside cannot be injected into it. Jill nodded, indicating that he understood what George meant and would pay attention to this. As for the use of this long-range syringe, it is similar to a pistol, so George did not explain the use. Just as everyone began to say goodbye to Luo Guang and Jill one by one, and handed the weapons and equipment that were no longer used to Luo Guang and Jill, the helicopter was visibly approaching, and with a loud noise, it soon landed on the open ground in the center of the square. George and others began to board the helicopter. "Goodbye, although you don't call me doctor very often, I will remember that you saved me." The person who said this was Nathaniel Budd. "I don't know if we will see each other again in the future. Do your best to develop the vaccine. It's worth saving your life." Luo Guang nodded, patted Bud on the shoulder, and said, "Goodbye, Dr. Bud." Bud nodded solemnly, took a small box of vaccines and a large bag of research materials, and boarded the rescue helicopter after Cindy. "Thank you, Luo Guang." The next people who said goodbye to Luo Guang were Elliot and David, who had already said goodbye to Jill. "Well, you're welcome. What are your plans in the future? Will you still be a policeman?" Luo Guang asked with a smile. "Of course I will continue to be a policeman." Elliot punched Luo Guang in the chest with his uninjured hand and said with a smile. "Thank you, Luo Guang, I will continue to be a policeman." After David finished speaking, he also said goodbye to Luo Guang, and then he and Elliot supported each other and boarded the rescue helicopter. Kevin and Tyrell simply said goodbye to Luo Guang and the other two without saying much, and quickly boarded the rescue helicopter. "Luo Guang, Jill, thank you for telling me all kinds of things about Umbrella, which made me see the truth. We will meet again if we are lucky." Carlos followed Tyrell and boarded the helicopter. "Luo Guang, please take care of Jill." Marvin was the last one to walk. "Yes." Luo Guang nodded and agreed to Marvin, while Jill looked very strong, wondering why Marvin didn't let him take care of Luo Guang. "Thank you." Marvin still had 1,000 words in his heart, and wanted to tell Luo Guang and Jill, but in the end, these thousands of words were gathered into a simple thank you, and then Marvin boarded the rescue helicopter with a worried look on his face. Evolution begins with Resident Evil. Author, Wei Tongmiao. Chapter 35. They should be able to leave Raccoon City safely, Luo Guang said with emotion as he looked at the rescue helicopter that was moving away from sight. "What do you mean by that? Are you worried that the helicopter will crash as soon as I board it?" Gil felt that there was something in Luo Guang's words. "Of course not. Jill, you didn't board the helicopter we contacted at the police station, but it crashed in the end." Luo Guang made a joke, but he was restrained and did not mention the sacrifice of the helicopter pilot. At this time, only Jill was by his side, and Luo Guang felt more comfortable. "You guy!" Gil gave Luo Guang a small punch on the chest. Gil pressed his fist in front of Luo Guang's heart, feeling Luo Guang's heartbeat, and the two sides fell into a brief silence. Luo Guang couldn't understand what Jill meant for a while, but finally it was Jill who broke the calm and asked, "Do you think we can really escape Raccoon City?" "Huh? Just wait until the next rescue helicopter comes." Luo Guang wondered why Jill was suddenly worried about this issue. There was a hint of sadness in Jill's eyes, and she said slowly, "I don't know, maybe it was the trauma caused to me when I was in the mansion before. I always feel that many things will not go as I want. Like me calling your rescue helicopter. It was the same in the foreign hotel before. No matter how I tried to escape from the foreign hotel as early as possible, I was still trapped there. It was as if fate was holding me by the throat and forcing me to face it. It wasn't until I solved the crisis that happened there that fate dropped its hold on my throat and let me leave." Gil said, took a small step forward and put his head on Luo Guang's chest. "It feels like a lot of pressure." Luo Guang can also understand Jill's thoughts. Just like himself before time travel, he was forced to go to work by reality, oppressed by debt, and could only accept the same every day. Gil replied softly, with his head lowered so that Luo Guang could not see Gil's current expression. But, Gil, don't regret it. Luo Guang could only rely on his understanding of Gil during this period of time to comfort Gil. As for Jill in the Resident Evil games, she basically maintains the image of a battlefield Valkyrie, and it is basically difficult to see Jill showing her weak side. Yes, because it is the right thing. Jill did not easily say that she was doing something just, as if the word justice was a heavy burden for Jill now. Well, I won't advise you to let go of this heavy burden. Luo Guang raised his hand and put it on Jill's head, but he was polite and didn't touch it. But it's okay to relax occasionally, and it's okay to find someone to talk to. Luo Guang said seriously, I can do these with you, so there is no need to push yourself so hard. Jill didn't answer. The two of them maintained such a posture, as if the flow of time had stopped. Not sure how much time had passed, Gil took a deep breath, exhaled it slowly, raised his head and left Luo Guang's chest. Jill's eyes were a little red, but Luo Guang didn't point it out because Luo Guang knew that when the time came, the strong Jill was back. Next, we have to. In order to change his mood, Gil was about to discuss the next plan with Luo Guang when a loud noise suddenly came. Boom! The wall of the main building of Raccoon City University was broken by a huge force, revealing a huge hole. Luo Guang and Gil's eyes changed, and they immediately entered a fighting stance. Looking towards the place where the sound came from, Luo Guang and Gil both showed angry looks after being disturbed. Compared with the previous Death Tyrant, his body is much larger, and his muscles are becoming more and more swollen, and the lines outlined by the muscles are full of the beauty of power. The one who broke through the wall was the Death Tyrant who had been defeated before. Luo Guang and Gil had the same judgment. But there are still many differences between the appearance of the Death God in front of me and the previous Death Tyrant. First of all, the originally huge right arm disappeared, as if a limb amputation surgery had been performed, but the opposite left arm has become even bigger. The claws became longer and larger, and turned white all over, like bone claws. What worried Luo Guang and Gil the most was that the Death Tyrant's originally black skin had many yellow spots on it, and there were two pairs of membrane wings behind him. It seems that close combat is still the main focus, but the yellow spots and the membrane wings on the back seem to have absorbed the T-virus-infected wasps in Raccoon City University. Luo Guang thought of the giant wasps mentioned by Carlos and analyzed them. So it may be able to fly, and it is very likely that the wasp sting is hidden. Gil knew some of the characteristics of the wasp, and immediately thought that the Death Tyrant might also acquire these abilities. The Death Tyrant did not give Luo Guang and the two more time to analyze and discuss countermeasures, and his eyes were fixed on Jill. That was the last order given to the Death Tyrant by researcher Greg Muller before his death, to fight Jill and others. Performing his mission faithfully, the Death Tyrant placed his first target on Jill. Unexpectedly, the Death Tyrant was still charging halfway, and a burst of white smoke spread out quickly on the way the Death Tyrant was charging. That was Luo Guang's meeting gift to the Death Tyrant, in order to confirm whether the Death Tyrant had the ability to fly. The Death Tyrant did not stop sprinting, but after rushing out of the smoke, he crashed into another white smoke. Those were the smoke bombs that Luo Guang and Jill had thrown at their original positions. After throwing the smoke bombs, Luo Guang and Jill immediately separated and ran out of the smoke range, one on the left and one on the right. This chapter is not over yet. Please click on the next page to continue reading the exciting content. Neither Luo Guang nor Jill fired rashly to avoid hitting the friendly forces on the opposite side through the smoke. The Death Tyrant crashed into the smoke again, but this time the Death Tyrant did not continue to rush out of the smoke, because the position where the Death Tyrant stopped was exactly where Luo Guang and Jill were before. The Death Tyrant still had a certain degree of intelligence. In its logic, Luo Guang and Jill were hiding in the smoke and preparing to ambush itself, so after he stopped, he immediately used his only left claw to sweep 360 degrees, intending to force Luo Guang and Jill, who were hiding in the smoke, away, and also to disperse the smoke. But the Death Tyrant's attack could only return in vain. The smoke formed by the two smoke bombs was more than the Death Tyrant imagined, and soon the empty area in the middle was covered again by the smoke bombs that were still spraying smoke. The Death Tyrant found the smoke bomb on the ground, crushed it with one foot, roared, and fluttered its two pairs of membrane wings wildly, blowing the smoke. It squatted down and jumped into the sky. The Death Tyrant rushed out of the smoke range and was about to search for the location of Jill and Luo Guang, which attracted the first round of shooting from Luo Guang and Jill. Luo Guang and Jill's target was not the body of the Death Tyrant, but the two pairs of membrane wings that kept flapping behind the Death Tyrant, so the weapons in their hands at this time were MP5 submachine guns that could fire in full automatic mode and had a lot of ammunition. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. Both submachine guns were in full automatic mode, and they fired wildly under the control of Luo Guang and Jill, instantly turning the two pairs of membrane wings behind the Death Tyrant into sieves. The Death Tyrant did not stay in the air for too long, and went straight up and down, and fell to the ground again, but as soon as his feet landed, the Death Tyrant immediately jumped out again facing Jill's direction. But the action pattern of the Death Tyrant had been figured out by Jill. After the Death Tyrant jumped for the first time, Jill immediately threw a smoke bomb under his feet, so the Death Tyrant jumped for the second time and jumped into a new smoke group again. But this time, the Death Tyrant trapped in the smoke had not had time to jump out of the smoke, and was shot with 30 rounds of 9mm bullets after Jill changed the magazine. Luo Guang listened to the sound and quickly confirmed that Jill was not in front of him. He also shot a full round of magazines at the opposite place. Luo Guang and Jill had plenty of 9mm bullets, and the magazines of pistols and submachine guns were also sufficient, so Luo Guang and Jill would waste so much to shoot at the Death Tyrant in the smoke. The Death Tyrant in the smoke had no sense of defense, so although his body was hidden in the smoke, he was still hit by Jill and Luo Guang's shooting at the weak points that were still exposed. "Lead to the main building," Jill shouted, and immediately left his original position and ran towards the main building of Raccoon City University. Death Tyrant roared, protected his weak spot with his hands, and jumped in the direction where Jill shouted. In midair, Death Tyrant saw Jill running towards the main building of Raccoon City University. Not long after, another human also joined his target, Jill. As soon as he landed at the place where Jill shouted, Death Tyrant jumped again without stopping and jumped towards the main building of Raccoon City University. At this time, the muscle group of Death Tyrant was strengthened again, and it could slightly resist the reaction force when landing, which allowed Death Tyrant to make fast continuous jumps. Jill discovered this problem, so she asked Luo Guang to lead Death Tyrant into the main building of Raccoon City University, just to seal Death Tyrant's jumping ability. Death Tyrant jumping in the air saw Jill and the others running into the main building, and just as he landed in front of the main door of the main building, two round black objects at his feet suddenly exploded, covering Death Tyrant. This is the speed and time of the Tyrant's jump forward calculated by the system for Luo Guang. Luo Guang also predicted that the next move of the Death Tyrant would be to jump over and chase Jill and himself. Therefore, according to the information provided by the system and the accurate countdown, he held the grenade in both hands and threw it at the expected landing point of the Death Tyrant before entering the main building. If the Death Tyrant had emotions, then he would probably feel aggrieved at this moment. But it is obvious that the Death Tyrant has no emotions. After being hit by a burst of fragmentation grenades, the Death Tyrant did not stop and directly broke through the door of the main building of Raccoon City University. He scanned his eyes and looked for the traces of Jill and Luo Guang. Click, click. Two sounds sounded from the side and rear of the Death Tyrant, attracting the attention of the Death Tyrant, and he looked in the direction of the sound. Bang! Bang! Two loud noises accompanied by two huge flashes directly shone into the retina and eardrum of the Death Tyrant, causing the Death Tyrant to lose his vision and hearing for a while. The T-Virus was frantically repairing the damaged vision and hearing of the Death Tyrant, allowing the Death Tyrant to recover quickly, but this short period of time was enough for Luo Guang and Jill to hit the Death Tyrant's weak spot with another round of bullets. The Death Tyrant was restarted by sacrificing his right hand, and then he absorbed those infected wasps and officially came back to life. At this time, the continuous heavy blows forced the Death Tyrant to roar, protect his weak spot, squat down, and wait for the wound to recover, which is commonly known as the stiff state. Seeing this, Luo Guang quickly threw the MP5 submachine gun in his hand behind him with the gun belt, pulled another gun belt, and took the Ma-41 assault rifle behind him. Although the left claw of the Death Tyrant became even bigger after resurrection, the weakness on the right chest did not shrink much. Half-crouching Luo Guang raised his gun and aimed, and the 3 points were in a straight line, and the crosshairs were set on the weakness of the Death Tyrant. This chapter is not over yet, please click on the next page to continue reading the exciting content. Bang bang bang. This time Luo Guang used all his strength and used his own strength advantage to forcibly offset the recoil of his Ma-41 assault rifle, allowing the 5.56 mm bullet to accurately hit the gap in the giant claw of the Death Tyrant. On the other side, Jill was not idle either. While Luo Guang was outputting, he retreated to the depths of the main building and shouted, "I'm here." Jill meant to tell Luo Guang to join him and cover each other. Got it. Luo Guang fired a magazine and immediately evacuated. After getting away from the Death Tyrant, he approached Jill and soon followed Jill into the corridor on the left. The Death Tyrant seemed to understand that his defensive posture was a living target for the enemy. After trying hard to recover his vision and hearing, he immediately stood up and looked at the location where Luo Guang made the running sound. Seeing Luo Guang enter the corridor on the left, the Death Tyrant roared and continued to chase him relentlessly. "Luo, are you ready to use the sunlight vaccine?" Jill was waiting in front of the corridor. When she saw Luo Guang walk into the corridor, she threw another smoke bomb behind Luo Guang and asked at the same time. This was the last smoke bomb on Jill. "No, this Death Tyrant doesn't have much energy left to heal himself." Luo Guang shook his head and said, "Keep it just in case. Who knows if there will be any other terrifying T-Virus monsters besides this Death Tyrant." The two of them didn't stop and hid in a classroom. At this time, the Death Tyrant roared and rushed out of the thick fog, but found that Luo Guang and Jill were not in the corridor, and there was no sound of running. The Death Tyrant slowed down and was a little overwhelmed for a while. The Death Tyrant is a high-performance combat tyrant, but in terms of chasing the enemy, it is not as good as the equally excellent Goddess of Revenge. The reason why the Death Tyrant could find Jill at the main gate of Raccoon City University before was because the rescue helicopter made a loud noise there, and at this time, Luo Guang and Jill could not locate it unless they made some movement. Luo Guang and Jill hid in a classroom and waited quietly. Although the Death Tyrant seemed to have been played by Luo Guang and Jill, in terms of the enhanced mobility, especially the running speed, Luo Guang and Jill could not match the Death Tyrant, so Luo Guang and Jill gave up the bullfighting style of surrounding the Death Tyrant before. With a loud bang, the Death Tyrant smashed through a wall of a classroom in the corridor. After the Death Tyrant regained his sight, he scanned the room and did not see Jill and the others, so he left the classroom and prepared to go to another room. This was the best way that the Death Tyrant could think of. Just as the Death Tyrant turned back to the corridor, Luo Guang and Jill saw the opportunity and prepared a big gift package of grenades and flash bombs for the Death Tyrant. But the Death Tyrant was not a fool, and naturally understood that what Luo Guang and Jill threw over was probably the things that would explode, flash, and make loud noises before. The way the Death Tyrant dealt with it was also very simple. Regardless of those things, he rushed straight to the position where Jill and Luo Guang were, and at the same time he could escape the range of those thrown objects. But Luo Guang had thought of this long ago. With the help of the system, Luo Guang controlled the time very accurately. As soon as the Death Tyrant took the starting position, the thrown objects that flew in front of him exploded before they landed. First, the flash stun grenade deprived the Death Tyrant of his vision and hearing again, and then the fragmentation grenade caused full damage to the Death Tyrant, who could not take a defensive posture. This time, the Death Tyrant used hard support and did not fall into a stiff state. In addition, in order to avoid the loud noise of the flash stun grenade, Luo Guang and Jill did not leave the classroom immediately. But after the second loud noise, the fragmentation grenade exploded. Luo Guang and Jill immediately prepared to continue to retreat to the back door of Raccoon City University, and continued to consume the energy of the Death Tyrant along the way. Although the Death Tyrant was holding on and walked towards Luo Guang and Jill with firm steps, it was obvious that Luo Guang and Jill had discovered one thing. The wound on the Death Tyrant caused by the fragmentation grenade had not healed. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Evolution begins with Resident Evil. Author, Wei Tongmiao. Chapter 36. Luo Guang and Jill took turns to cover and gradually retreated. Relying on the terrain of the main building, they fought a guerrilla war with the Death Tyrant. Finally, Luo Guang and Jill came to the square in front of the back door of Raccoon City University, where they fought the Death Tyrant for the first time. At this time, Luo Guang still had 2 grenades, no stun grenades, but a smoke bomb, several 9mm bullets, but only one magazine of 5.56mm bullets. Jill still had 3 grenades, a stun grenade, and a smoke bomb that Luo Guang gave to Jill. He also had several 9mm bullets, and one more magazine of 5.56mm bullets than Luo Guang. In addition, Jill had a shotgun with 8 bullets and a grenade launcher with only 1 high-explosive bullet. As for the Death Tyrant, it seemed that he was at the end of his rope. He had many wounds on his body, and red and black blood was constantly flowing out. He no longer had the strength to sprint. Only Greg Mueller's final instructions drove the Death Tyrant forward to perform the final mission. After being led into the main building of Raccoon City University by Luo Guang and Jill, the Death Tyrant was stuck by the terrain. The wall could not stop the brutal power of the Death Tyrant, but it could effectively block the speed of the Death Tyrant's sprint and the vision of searching for the enemy. At this time, the Death Tyrant finally left the main building of Raccoon City University, which almost made him fail, but he could no longer hold on and fell down in the square. Before Luo Guang used the M5P submachine gun to test whether the Death Tyrant was pretending to be dead, the Death Tyrant's body suddenly twitched and twisted. What's going on? Jill was surprised. It feels like, maybe, the T-virus in the body can't be suppressed, Luo Guang doubted. Speak human language, Jill said angrily. At this time, Luo Guang actually had the mind to dawdle. This is not Luo Guang's fault. As the saying goes, mutation is 3 points weaker. Most of the T-virus mutations actually bring more unfavorable mutations, so Luo Guang is not as nervous as Jill. It's the T-virus in the Death Tyrant that senses that the host is going to die, so in order to survive, it proliferates and mutates on its own. Just as Luo Guang finished speaking, the Death Tyrant's body began to change. First, the muscles of the hands and feet began to shrink continuously, turning into a state of skin and bones, and then the 2 pairs of membrane wings on the back of the Death Tyrant fell off, and the latissimus dorsi began to bulge and swell. Luo Guang and Jill naturally would not watch the Death Tyrant in front of them mutate. The 2 of them picked up their submachine guns and started shooting at the bulging flesh behind the Death Tyrant. The irregular, disgusting flesh was beaten by Luo Guang and Jill, but the Death Tyrant's eyes turned white without a trace of agility, and his slightly opened mouth did not roar again. This was the final counterattack of the T-virus in the Death Tyrant. Luo Guang changed a new magazine and was about to ask the Death Tyrant to eat another fragmentation grenade when the huge meatball suddenly exploded from the mutation of the Death Tyrant. A thin blood mist briefly enveloped a humanoid figure in the center of the meatball. But this did not affect Luo Guang's actions. He directly threw a fragmentation grenade after pinching it for 2 seconds and called Jill to keep some distance. With a bang, the fragmentation grenade exploded in the air, and the small steel balls inside directly enveloped the Death Tyrant underground, and also blew away the blood mist. After the blood mist dissipated, Luo Guang and Jill finally saw what was inside. It was a few sizes smaller than the previous Death Tyrant and looked like a human, but it only had 2 hands, 2 legs and a head like a human. The so-called head was just an irregular tumor without facial features, and each hand was a wriggling tentacle, and the legs and feet full of pustules were still connected to the original body of the Death Tyrant. After the fragmentation grenade exploded, Luo Guang and Jill did not act rashly for the time being, and observed the actions of the new form of the Death Tyrant. Just as Luo Guang was observing the situation, the newly grown tentacles of the Death Tyrant suddenly swung towards Luo Guang and the others. With a whoosh, Luo Guang vaguely heard the sound of the air being broken. Luo Guang reacted quickly and directly threw Jill, who was standing beside him, to the ground. Then he used one hand to push the ground hard and stood up. At the same time, Luo Guang's bullets naturally fought back. As if to replenish energy, the new form of the Death Tyrant evolved a long-range attack, which was similar to the tentacle attack of the Goddess of Vengeance. Jill, who had been fighting for days, did not react at the first time, but fortunately Luo Guang threw her down. Taking advantage of Luo Guang's counterattack, Jill immediately stood up and fired, making up for the firepower gap when Luo Guang was changing bullets. In pursuit of energy replenishment, the T-virus in the Death Tyrant's body strengthened its attack ability, but completely gave up its defense. At this time, the Death Tyrant's whole body became its weakness. The bullets that were faster and more damaging than the tentacles were directly sent into the Death Tyrant's new body. The Death Tyrant waved its tentacles randomly, as if trying to block the bullets, but it was in vain. Luo Guang only remembered that after he changed the magazine 3 times, the Death Tyrant who intended to counterattack finally stopped moving. However, just when Luo Guang and Jill were about to relax and return to the broadcasting room to contact the rescue helicopter at any time, a huge thing suddenly rushed out of the water in the Marbu River next to Raccoon City University and landed directly in the square in front of the back door of Raccoon City University. This monster is about 2 stories tall, with a huge eye on the piece of flesh in front of it. Its skin is mainly dark green, its body is covered in lumps, and countless tentacles appear from behind. This chapter is not finished yet, please click on the next page to continue reading the exciting content. 2 of the tentacles rushed directly towards the body of the Death Tyrant, wrapped around it, and dragged it back to the huge monster. Then the monster squirmed forward and slowly pressed its body against the Death Tyrant's body. Go up and directly swallow the Tyrant of Death into the body. Upon seeing this, Luo Guang said directly to Jill, retreat directly to the main building of the university. It seems that this monster doesn't move very fast. I hope the opponent is too big and weak. Luo Guang could only think so and ran into the main building of Raccoon City University. Gil ran in after Luo Guang and shouted, "What the hell is that?" "I don't know, maybe aquatic animals mutated after being infected with the T-virus." Luo Guang didn't know what it was. The 2 stood at the back door of the main building of Raccoon City University, observing the monster that suddenly appeared. Considering the current situation in Raccoon City, there is a high probability that it is also a monster infected with the T-virus. What should we do? Gil glanced at the sunlight vaccine hanging on his waist and said, "It's time to use the trump card." Yeah, Luo Guang nodded and agreed with Gil. He had not asked Gil to kill the Death Tyrant with the sunlight vaccine just as a precaution, and he did the right thing. The monster suddenly let out a huge roar, which sounded like a human roar. Under the gaze of Luo Guang and Gil, the front ends of the tentacles of the monster that had absorbed the body of the Death Tyrant began to turn white and became sharper and sharper, just like the previous giant claws of the Death Tyrant. This is using the claws of the Tyrant of Death for his own use. Luo Guang saw the change in the other party. But at this time, Luo Guang didn't have any good ideas. The mutation had already begun and it couldn't be stopped with bullets. Moreover, the opponent was huge and seemed to be full of energy. Luo Guang was worried that the opponent would mutate into a hard shell not long after he fired. So since the daylight vaccine was to be used on this monster, Luo Guang and Gil had no intention of shooting while the other party was evolving. The opponent doesn't seem to be moving very fast, but those tentacles look very troublesome. Luo Guang took advantage of this time to discuss countermeasures with Jill. Jill took advantage of this time to rest. The consecutive days of fighting had exhausted her physically and mentally. If Luo Guang hadn't thrown herself down just now, she would have been knocked away or even cut in half by the Tyrant of Death. Well, there are too many tentacles. If all these tentacles are used to attack, it will be difficult for us to hide. Gil agreed with Luo Guang's statement and added, the problem is where is the weakness of this monster? Those knots look like they are all inside. It's a liquid, so the sun vaccine shouldn't have any effect if injected into it. How about the eyes? I don't know, but that big eyeball is definitely our first choice for a breakthrough, Luo Guang said. So we still have to fight a tough battle. Gil had gotten used to it and checked the number of ammunition in the magazine of the weapon in his hand. Well, anyway, let's rely on the main building of Raccoon City University to fight, Luo Guang suggested. Neither Luo Guang nor Gil ran away, because the monster seemed to know Gil and Luo Guang. When the body mutated, its big eyes were still staring at the two of them, as if there was a blood feud. Gil didn't want the rescue helicopter to be shot down again, and Luo Guang had the same idea. The two of them had to fight this monster. It didn't take long, but Luo Guang and Jill had just decided on the course of action, and the monster over there had finished evolving. Before Luo Guang could shoot, the middle part of the monster suddenly split to the left and right like petals, and a halfling emerged from the monster. Luo Guang. S.T.A.R.S. There was obviously only one mouth, but two sounds came out of the monster's mouth at the same time. They mixed together and sounded very weird. With this roar, the monster struck preemptively, and the tentacles behind it rushed towards Luo Guang and Gil. Naturally, Luo Guang and the others would not choose to be tough and hid behind the wall. The white thorn tentacles thrust out all kinds of thrusts and hit the wall, leaving traces all over the wall. And what's different from before is that these white thorn tentacles have not been retracted. Some of the tentacles are still attacking Luo Guang and Gil's bunkers. The tentacles on the other side play a role in assisting movement, using the white spikes on the tentacles. Insert it into various places, and then the tentacles shrink and pull the monster forward. Gil has heard the monster's phrase S.T.A.R.S. many times. The monster's cry reminded Gil again of the time when he was chased by the goddess of revenge. But Luo Guang is by my side as before. Gil glanced at Luo Guang, who was avoiding the attack on the other wall. Luo Guang noticed Gil's gaze and pointed to the inside of the main building of Raccoon City University. After receiving Luo Guang's signal and nodding, Jill and Luo Guang left the wall where they were hiding and continued running towards the interior of the main building. Have you seen the half-human one? Luo Guang asked while pointing to the stairs to the second floor. I see, the protection is in the monster's body, and it is most likely the monster's core. Jill naturally understood what Luo Guang meant by the half-human in the monster's body, and said, but we only have one sunlight vaccine, and the monster will definitely hide its weaknesses when we fight back. This monster should be part of the goddess of vengeance, right? Luo Guang heard the monster's cry. It should be, but it also called your name, Luo Guang. Jill wondered if there were any enemies of Luo Guang in the current goddess of vengeance. That voice might be Nikolai's. According to the results of the system's analysis of the sound pattern, 36.96% of it matched the voice of Nikolai that Luo Guang had heard before. And in Luo Guang's impression, for most of the time in Raccoon City, he was a good image who was willing to help others, and basically only Nikolai was the enemy who was beaten by Luo Guang. It's really annoying. Jill felt that this kind of persistent monster was very annoying. But this time we have a weapon that can really kill the goddess of vengeance. Luo Guang said, I have a plan, Jill. Although it has the assistance of the white thorn tentacles, the movement speed of the new goddess of vengeance is still surprisingly slow. Luo Guang and Jill came to the window on the third floor, opened the window, set up the assault rifle in their hands, and directly poured out all the remaining 5.56 mm bullets of the assault rifle. Looking down from a high position, Luo Guang and Jill's bullets all hit the half-human body of the goddess of vengeance, which was still 5 or 6 meters away from the main building of Raccoon City University. Facing the fierce attack of 2 assault rifles, the goddess of vengeance was directly scared. Not only did she retract the half-human body into her body, but she also moved back all the tentacles that were still madly attacking the wall on the first floor. Luo Guang and Jill's assault rifle bullets were running out. Before the half-human body of the goddess of vengeance, fusion, retracted, Luo Guang and Jill's assault rifles had already misfired. Because the assault rifles were running out of bullets, Luo Guang and Jill had already untied their gun belts when they were setting up their guns. As soon as the bullets ran out, Luo Guang threw away the Ma-41 assault rifle that had played a lot of roles, and took out the fragmentation grenade. Jill on the other side threw away the assault rifle given by Tyrell, took out the MP5 submachine gun and continued to suppress, not aiming to penetrate the fat on the body of the goddess of vengeance and cause damage to the half-human body inside, but to shoot off the tentacles dancing in the air. With a bang, the fragmentation grenade exploded directly on the goddess of vengeance, and the steel balls in the grenade directly baptized the upper flesh of the goddess of vengeance. The goddess of vengeance was not the type who would just take a beating without fighting back. Some of the shorter tentacles covered her own tumorous lumps one by one to defend against attacks, and the other longer tentacles launched a counter-attack against the positions attacked by Luo Guang and Jill. With 2 clangs, the glass of the window that Luo Guang and Jill had opened and moved aside was shattered by the goddess of vengeance. The broken glass flew everywhere. Jill squatted down and hid behind the wall with her hands covering her eyes to protect herself. But after Luo Guang confirmed with his eyes that the enemy's attack would not hit him, he chose to stand still, picked up his M5P submachine gun and fired a burst of shots, directly smashing and interrupting all the tentacles that were hitting him. Luo Guang. I don't know where the goddess of vengeance looked at her head. Being attacked so blatantly by Luo Guang, the part of Nikolai in the goddess of vengeance couldn't stand the suffocation. Suddenly, the part representing Nikolai, the half-human body, came out of the goddess of vengeance and roared at Luo Guang's position. If it was still Nikolai in his lifetime, he would definitely not do such an incompetent and furious stupid thing, but unfortunately, the part of Nikolai in the goddess of vengeance was just a residue at this time, and did not inherit Nikolai's intelligence and insidiousness. Jill. Plan B. Luo Guang gave Jill a signal directly. Go to hell, monster. Jill stood up with a grenade launcher in his hand, aimed, cursed, and pulled the trigger of the grenade launcher. The last high-explosive bomb was fired, and the face of the half-human body with a bit of Nikolai was directly blurred. The high-explosive bomb seemed to make the goddess of vengeance extremely painful. The instinct of survival made the goddess of vengeance regain control again and retract the half-human body. But Luo Guang would not give the other party a chance. Because the main body is still the goddess of vengeance, the main target is likely to be Jill. This is the task engraved in the body of the goddess of vengeance by Umbrella. So when Luo Guang went up to the 3rd floor, he took the remote injection gun with the sunlight vaccine from Jill's hand, and planned to take advantage of the flaw of the goddess of vengeance to sneak attack from the other side to inject the sunlight vaccine into the body of the goddess of vengeance. This is Plan A. If the goddess of vengeance sets her target on Luo Guang, Jill's last high-explosive bomb is the best weapon to attract the hatred of the goddess of vengeance, and it can also be used with the remaining fragmentation grenades to break the top defense of the goddess of vengeance. When the goddess of vengeance was exposed by Jill's high-explosive bomb attack, it was also the time for Luo Guang to take action. This was Plan B. And now, It was the right time, because Luo Guang was attacking from a high position, so the long-range syringe could shoot a little further. Pulling the trigger, the sunlight vaccine in the long-range syringe was shot out and flew towards the roaring half-human body of the goddess of vengeance. Evolution begins with Resident Evil. Author, Wei Tongmiao. Chapter 37. Is this dead? Gil asked with lingering fear as he looked at the goddess of revenge who had turned into a puddle of ooze. Gil, who had been fighting all the way and lacked rest, slid down the wall and sat on the ground after Luo Guang nodded and said that the goddess of revenge should be dead. If we don't die, we have no choice but to run away. At least the nemesis in this form doesn't move very fast. We can just use the main building of Raccoon City University to escape from its attack range. Luo Guang smiled bitterly, his eyes not leaving the puddle of nemesis, thinking that it was great that the simple plan he had set before did not encounter any unexpected problems. Sure enough, brains are very important, but it is a pity that nemesis is gone. What time is it now? Gil suddenly thought of something, stood up on the ground, and asked Luo Guang. At this time, the sky in Raccoon City was still very gloomy. Luo Guang looked at his electronic watch and said, 10:34 a.m. on September 30th. Oops. Jill suddenly shouted and said, in the temporary house in Bell Tower Square, Luo Guang, you ran to the hospital to find Marvin at that time, and we all listened to the TV broadcast in the house, and the content inside was the military you mentioned before will take action and burn Raccoon City to the ground. This is not much different from the information I received before. Luo Guang nodded, saying that he had also told Jill about this, and hinted that it was very likely to happen to Jill. Luo Guang thought that Jill was so nervous because he had advanced the time when it might happen. Is that why Jill was so nervous? Luo Guang glanced at Jill with some confusion. The military will disinfect Raccoon City at 7 o'clock in the morning on October 1st, which is later than the time Luo Guang said. Gil told Luo Guang about the TV broadcast. Isn't that great? There are nearly 20 hours left. The rescue helicopter will be here to rescue us. The time announced on TV was the same as the setting of the Resident Evil game, so Luo Guang was not surprised and tilted his head. I don't understand what Jill means. But the broadcast mentioned that all rescue workers and others in Raccoon City must evacuate before 11 a.m. on September 30th, and they are not allowed to enter Raccoon City after that. Jill didn't have a watch, and it was still dark, so Jill kept not much sense of the passage of time. Then let's go to the broadcast room to call for support now. Luo Guang didn't ask Jill why he didn't tell Jill such important information earlier. Solving the problem was the key, so he called Jill and rushed to the broadcast room to make contact. Gil followed behind, and Luo Guang comforted him, no matter what, it will still be a long time before the military disinfection. If we can contact the enthusiastic rescue helicopter pilot, we can leave as soon as possible. What if? Jill still looked worried. And we can also try to contact someone. Luo Guang thought of whose helicopter Jill escaped from Raccoon City in the game. Who? As I mentioned before, your STARS teammate Barry Burton, Luo Guang said, but my intelligence network only mentioned that Barry is now alone in Canada and seems to be preparing something. Among them, Barry, it seems that he rented a helicopter about a week ago. After he learns about your situation, Jill, he will probably come to Raccoon City to rescue you. The two quickly arrived on the third floor, switching places, and Jill led the way to the broadcast room. The first is to find rescuers who are willing to take us out of Raccoon City. Although the military prohibits rescue, this unreasonable rule may be protested. The second is to see if your teammate Barry Burton has come to Raccoon City. The third thing is what I said before, find a car and drive away, but I don't know how to lock the car and turn on the electricity to start the car. Luo Guang also said these words to himself. As long as he lists possible escape methods and has things to think about, he will not be so anxious that it affects his judgment. After Luo Guang gave Gil a summary, Gil thought about Luo Guang's analysis, and then his mentality calmed down. Starting with Luo Guang's summary, he began to think about escape. Jill noticed that Luo Guang said that he didn't know how to unlock a car and start a car, so he said, I learned how to unlock a car and start a car when I was in the State Army. I also learned the skills as a Special Forces force. Although I have always learned there is no chance of using it, but it shouldn't be a big problem. If we leave Raccoon City, how far or how long will it take to get away from the explosion? Luo Guang and Jill came to the broadcast room and took out the Raccoon City map from their backpacks. To be honest, Luo Guang had no idea how big Raccoon City was, so he could only ask for help from Jill. Because Raccoon City is surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, the impact of the explosion should not be as great as expected. Gil stood next to Luo Guang, looked at the tourist map of Raccoon City in Luo Guang's hand, pointed to a road next to Raccoon City University, and continued, you can leave Raccoon City by walking straight on this road. The military should it's just a blockade on the road and railway. I think the distance is about 30 or 40 kilometers. This distance is not bad, so we can probably just find a bicycle and ride out directly. Then we don't have to try our luck to find a rescue helicopter. Luo Guang suddenly thought that after experiencing so many things, he would feel hungry at most. My physical strength is still so abundant, and both the system and the T-virus have contributed a lot to my transformation. If you want to ride a bicycle, I won't do it. Gil ruthlessly rejected Luo Guang's invitation for a bicycle trip. You can also drive, Luo Guang said. I feel that all the cars that can escape have probably escaped, and the rest are probably scrapped cars or cars that were blocked. Gil is quite aware of his luck and the situation. Otherwise, I would have asked to find a car and drive away. Luo Guang naturally knew about these situations. After all, Luo Guang gave up the idea of driving out of Raccoon City not long after traveling. At this time, he suddenly mentioned this plan just to add another option, so he put this option first. 3. In that case, let's eliminate them one by one in the order of 1, 2, and 3. Just take this time, Jill, take a rest. If we are really so unlucky, maybe we really need to go on a bicycle trip. Big deal, you sit behind me and I'll take you. After Luo Guang finished speaking, he put away the map. Well, in this case, we should set aside at least about 6 hours, so that we won't be too tired. Jill made suggestions for the bicycle trip. Okay, it's settled. Luo Guang said this, thinking that if he really couldn't get in touch, there would be an escape route through Umbrella's underground laboratory train. If Leon and others followed the game plot, the time to escape must be at least after the early morning of October 1st, so that he and Jill can still catch the last underground train in time. Thinking that Marvin would not deliberately change the channel of the call after contacting the rescue helicopter, Jill turned on the radio and immediately started to contact the rescue helicopter. This is Raccoon City University, and there are 2 civilians here, asking for rescue, over. There was no response. After waiting for about 10 seconds, Jill pressed the speak button again and said, there are 2 civilians here waiting for rescue. If you hear me, please reply, over. Still no response. Jill refused to give up and was about to speak again when a young male voice came over the radio. This is the A-28 rescue helicopter pilot. When Luo Guang and Gil heard the words of the rescue helicopter pilot, they couldn't help but smile with joy. However, the next words of the rescue helicopter pilot made Luo Guang and Gil's moods fall to the bottom. People from Raccoon City University, I'm sorry, our helicopter can no longer take off. The pilot of the A-28 rescue helicopter was the helicopter pilot who picked up Marvin and others before. He regretted, the flight just now was the last one. When I landed, I received a notice from the military that all rescue helicopters, no matter which side they belong to, are not allowed to leave the rescue isolation area after 11 o'clock this morning. Otherwise, the military has the right to shoot down without warning, over. Gil glanced at the wall clock in the broadcast room and said anxiously, it's not yet 11 o'clock, so we should still be able to take off. and the military's disinfection time should be tomorrow, which is enough for you to save 2 more people. Sorry, it's not that I don't want to come and rescue you too, it's just that this is a mandatory requirement of the military. Is there really no way to be accommodating? It's still a long time before Raccoon City is disinfected. Why did the rescue operation stop so quickly? Over. There was no immediate answer from the other side. After a while, a male voice that was different from the previous driver's voice said, "I'm sorry, this is a rule. Please understand, over." If you were to find an owner for this voice, it would be someone who was rigid in doing things, Luo Guang thought. Luo Guang also has anger, but Luo Guang knows that anger alone cannot solve the problem, just like some of the customers he met before traveling through time. But the rules are dead, Jill roared angrily. You can save 2 more lives, are you going to die without saving them? Jill was so angry that she even missed the word over to indicate that she had finished speaking. I'm sorry, Raccoon City is no man's land now. I suggest you make other plans as soon as possible and find other ways to escape. And what we can do is not just shoot you to death after you escape Raccoon City. Communication ends, over. The other party unilaterally stated that it would end the communication, which was a hint that it would no longer respond, and Luo Guang and Jill fell into silence. A few seconds later, Jill's tone was a little low, and she asked, "Is Raccoon City already a no man's land? The first option is eliminated, and then the second option, how do we call Barry?" Gil didn't believe that the helicopter pilot who apologized to him didn't tell the military that there were still survivors at Raccoon City University, but the military concluded that Raccoon City was no man's land. Is there any higher level force involved? But there is no point in discussing the conspiracy behind it at this time. Gil is waiting for Luo Guang's suggestions or ideas. Gil, try using your previous STARS communication channel or something like that. Luo Guang didn't remember how Gil and Barry contacted each other for lessons in the game, and the current plot is also very different from the game. Yes, you can give this a try. After saying that, Jill adjusted the channel to the dedicated channel of STARS Alpha Team and started calling for support. This is Jill Valentine, please answer, over. In order to confirm as quickly as possible whether anyone was on the channel, Jill didn't say too much and could save some energy. There was no reply, but Gil was not discouraged and continued to call again. More patient than before, Jill kept calling out, not knowing whether it was because of her trust in Luo Guang's intelligence or her trust in Barry Burton, her STARS teammate. This chapter is not over yet. Please click on the next page to continue reading the exciting content. In the middle of the journey, Luo Guang gave Jill the water in his backpack and took over Jill's position, also learning to call out, but there was no response. Finally, Jill sighed, and when she was about to tell Luo Guang that the second option could also be ruled out, a rustling sound of electricity suddenly sounded. Luo Guang and Jill's bodies shook, and they looked at the rustling radio station in surprise. Luo Guang stood up and looked at the flashing signal light of the radio station, while Jill picked up the walkie-talkie, ready to respond to the other party at any time. "Shasha, is it, Shasha?" The words from the radio station were intermittent, and it was impossible to understand what the other party meant. But as soon as the sound of electricity stopped, Jill immediately called out once, and stated her identity as before. "Shasha, Jill, you are, over." The voice was clearer than before, and Luo Guang could clearly hear the other party mention Jill's name. "This is Jill Valentine, please reply if you receive it, over." Jill continued to answer. A few minutes later, after Jill called for the third time, the other party responded again. "Received, Jill. This is Barry Burton, where are you?" Over. The other party's voice sounded very happy. A familiar voice of Jill came from the radio station, and Jill, who was in a low mood, finally relaxed his brows. "I am at Raccoon City University, gathering at the square at the main entrance of the main building of Raccoon City University, Over. Jill immediately told the other party the information Barry needed. Received. I am crossing the Arklay Mountains and will be there soon. Barry said that he was on his way and continued, it will take about 5 minutes, please ensure a safe landing, over. Okay, thank you, over. Jill was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief and thanked Barry. You're welcome, my comrade. Barry replied to Jill with a smile, the communication is over, see you later, over. See you later, over. Jill put down the walkie-talkie connected to the radio station, and said happily to Luo Guang, who was watching him and smiling, finally, I can leave this hell. Well, that's great. Luo Guang was also very happy. After going around in circles, he thought he would also be treated as a protagonist and would not be able to escape from Raccoon City until the last moment. Unexpectedly, he could successfully contact Barry. This time, there should be no more accidents. 5 minutes later, Jill and Luo Guang successfully boarded the helicopter rented by Barry. Where are we going? The military has blocked the road out of Raccoon City because the military announced in advance that Raccoon City was an uninhabited area. Jill did not believe the military at this time and asked. To Canada, my helicopter has the right of way, and it has also been equipped with a fuel tank, which is enough for us to go to Margaret Town in Canada. Barry did not rush to ask Luo Guang's identity, and planned to escape from Raccoon City first. Well, let's do as you planned. Jill relaxed at this time and just wanted to have a good rest. Luo Guang fastened his seat belt, put his backpack in front of him, and unzipped it. Barry drove the helicopter and began to move north. Luo Guang saw a sea of fire below and through the diary that was called surveillance but was actually peeping down. What is that? Jill watched Luo Guang throw the thing down. My past. Luo Guang looked at the notebook that fell into the sea of fire, and then looked at Jill. Holding Jill's hand tightly, Luo Guang said, I now hold the future with you. Evolution begins with Resident Evil. Author, Wei Tongmiao. Chapter 38. I'm back. Jill pushed the door open and said to Luo Guang and Barry, who were watching TV. Oh, Barry and Luo Guang were still looking at the TV and responded to Jill slightly. What are you watching? You are so fascinated. After putting down the ingredients in her hand, Jill walked to the two curiously and looked at the TV. Luo Guang and Barry were naturally not so fascinated by watching some paid channels, their faces were flushed. The matter in Raccoon City was covered up. Barry pointed to the TV screen and briefly summarized the news report. A fire broke out in the Arklay Mountains. In order to protect the safety of the people, the area is temporarily closed until the wildfire is extinguished. After Luo Guang and Jill took the civilian helicopter driven by Barry to escape from Raccoon City, Barry directly took Luo Guang and Jill to a border town in Maple Leaf Country. After Barry settled his wife and daughter, he did not always accompany his precious family. Instead, he secretly began to take active actions and prepared a number of safe houses through his connections in Maple Leaf Country. At this time, Luo Guang and Jill were in a place called Margaret Town, where one of the items Barry had prepared was located. Because of the defense agreement between Maple Leaf Country and Lighthouse Country, the border between the two countries was basically open, and the two sides were very convenient to travel between them. This also provided convenience for Barry to take Luo Guang and Jill to escape from Raccoon City and head north to this town. After taking off the military uniform, the weather turned cooler. Jill was wearing a white long-sleeved shirt with light black jeans. At Luo Guang's recommendation, she also wore a pair of tight sports pants under the jeans, and a black jacket of a similar style to Luo Guang's on the upper body. Back to the conversation. Jill didn't find it strange after hearing the conversation between Luo Guang and Barry. It was more strange that the news about Raccoon City was only reported now, so he asked, no mention of Raccoon City. Yes, the city government was brave and fearless and organized the evacuation of residents, Luo Guang said. The report only mentioned it briefly, and the picture at that time was that the brave firefighters were trying to put out the wildfire. The same propaganda method as always. Barry took a sip of beer and laughed, but it's enough to deal with most people. If you are not the person involved, how can you think about it and care about whether the media report is true or false? Jill still remembered the propaganda slander that STARS had suffered, and shook his head. Yes, so they don't know that Umbrella has opened Pandora's box in Raccoon City, and the biochemical crisis will gradually become the mainstream threat of this world. Luo Guang drank a sip of hot water and said, "Have you bought the steak? Then I'll go prepare dinner." "Well, it's already in the refrigerator." Jill went to the kitchen and put the bought ingredients in the refrigerator before entering the living room. Okay. Luo Guang got up and started to prepare dinner, which was also considered as rent for living in Barry's house. Luo Guang went to make dinner, and Jill took over Luo Guang's position. After drinking a sip of hot water to warm up, he watched the news on TV. "How did you rest?" Barry opened a bottle of beer for Jill and handed it to Jill. It has been 7 days since Luo Guang and Jill escaped from the hell of Raccoon City to this quiet town. Jill took the beer, took a sip, and after a sigh, he said, "I feel that I have rested enough, and it's time to go out." "That's good. Jill is planning to go to Europe, right?" Barry followed Jill's words and asked Jill about her plan. "Yes, Chris is in Europe. I plan to meet up with Chris first to discuss the next plan." Jill nodded. "This was planned before she fled Raccoon City. Chris contacted me before. I will give you Chris's contact information in Europe later." Barry continued to tell Jill the information he got from Chris. Chris seems to be planning to establish a semi-military organization dedicated to dealing with biochemical crises, but because there is no backing, it will be difficult to intervene in biochemical incidents if it starts from a civilian organization. A new STARS. Jill thought of the disbanded STARS team. It hasn't been named yet. You can talk to Chris when the time comes. Barry himself couldn't think of any good name. When he named his daughter, he was despised by his wife for a while, so he didn't plan to participate in the naming. "Okay, as for North America, I'll leave it to you." Barry stayed in Maple Leaf Country for the time being, so Jill said so. After finishing the business, Barry continued to ask some gossip. "If you go to Europe, will Luo go with you?" "No, he plans to return to Umbrella Corporation." Jill shook his head. Although Jill did not directly say that Luo Guang was going to be an undercover agent, Barry also understood Jill's meaning and said with a smile, "Are you willing to separate?" "There is nothing to be reluctant about." Jill drank a sip of cold beer, then shook his head and said, "Those of us who survived Raccoon City have things to accomplish." "Really? I don't think Luo Guang is a person with a strong sense of justice, unlike you, Jill." "This has nothing to do with Luo Guang's background as an intelligence agent of Umbrella Corporation. Barry noticed it from other places, such as his views on some things." I know Jill understood what Barry meant, but still said, "Luo Guang has his own moral bottom line and code of conduct." "I know this, but he still has a conscience." "I know, Jill, that you value Luo Guang very much, and I'm not saying that Luo Guang is a bad person." Looking at Luo Guang, who was busy in the kitchen, Barry whispered, "But I saw Luo Guang and a stranger yesterday." Conversation. This chapter is not over. Please click on the next page to continue reading. Not from a small town. There was a shocked look on Jill's face, but her reply was still lowered. "No, I feel like it might be someone from Umbrella Company." Barry shook his head and said, "The other party was very sneaky. By the time I asked the town's police chief to help investigate, that person had already left the town. The sheriff's information was only given to Barry this afternoon, so Barry didn't rush to tell Jill yesterday in case there was a misunderstanding." Barry asked further, "You basically stay together at night, didn't he say anything?" "Well." Jill recalled what happened yesterday. Luo Guang spent the whole day yesterday asking Jill for advice on fighting skills. Because they were tired, the two fell asleep quickly at night. As for Luo Guang's chat with the mysterious stranger, it probably happened when Luo Guang went out to buy ingredients. There was a dish that Luo Guang said he wanted to eat yesterday. Because Luo Guang didn't know how to pronounce the ingredients in English, and neither Jill nor Barry knew it, it was the first time Luo Guang offered to buy the ingredients himself. Gil discovered this, but he didn't believe that Luo Guang would deliberately hide it from him. Thinking of this, Gil wanted to ask Luo Guang directly. Seeing this, Barry pushed Jill back to the sofa and said, "Don't be too anxious, this is just my one-sided statement," and I saw that Luo Guang's expression seemed to be very complicated after chatting with the other party. When he found that I was nearby, he didn't panic about the stranger, and he didn't seem afraid of me asking about that person's identity. Barry didn't want Jill to hurt the rare relationship between the two because of her impulsiveness. I understand. Gil took another sip of beer, calmed his mind, and asked, "Then did you ask Luo Guang about that person?" "No, I believe the results of my investigation even more." Barry and Jill clinked the beer bottles, took a sip of beer, and then said, "Going back to what I said at the beginning, Luo Guang is not as righteous as you, Jill. I feel like he has his own plans, but he may not be able to get to the end with you." At this time, Barry seemed to treat Jill as his own daughter, so he was worried that Jill would suffer an emotional disadvantage. "I understand. I will have a good talk with Luo Guang tonight." Gil looked unhappy, frowning, as if he was thinking about what to say to Luo Guang. "What are you talking about?" Luo Guang was wiping his hands with a towel, walked behind Barry and asked. "It's nothing. I've almost had enough rest after talking about the things to come." Barry turned around and said to Luo Guang. "Really?" Luo Guang looked at Jill's face, pointed at him, and asked, "What's wrong with Jill? She seems to be in a bad mood." "That one is coming." Gil made an excuse casually. Drink more hot water." Luo Guang didn't know how to answer this, so he changed the subject. "The steak and tomato meat sauce pasta is ready. Eat first," Jill. Barry advised. At 10 o'clock in the evening, Luo Guang was lying on the bed. Since yesterday, he had not slept like he did when he first arrived in the town except for certain times. The stranger must have been seen by Barry. He recalled that the two of them were whispering while he was cooking, and then Jill's expression changed. Luo Guang also had some guesses in his mind, but Luo Guang didn't know how to tell Jill for a while, especially after Jill saw the news that the Lighthouse Country covered up the Raccoon City incident. It was even harder to speak. Thinking about how to tell Jill, Luo Guang's door was opened. Luo Guang turned his head and saw Jill walking in not long after taking a shower. The crystal-clear water droplets slid across Jill's slender and rosy neck, followed the attractive collarbone, and entered the ravine. "Luo Guang, I have something to ask you." Gil thought for a long time and decided to ask Luo Guang directly. "Is it about that stranger?" Luo Guang said, "I just want to talk to you about it." The moment he saw Jill, Luo Guang made a decision about something he had been struggling with for a long time. "Say it." Gil didn't know if Luo Guang said this because he knew the matter was exposed. He habitually got into Luo Guang's bed, leaned against the back of the bed, and waited for Luo Guang's next words. "That person may be someone sent by the top of the Lighthouse Country," Luo Guang said. "He asked me to be an undercover agent." Luo Guang finished what Jill wanted to know most in just a few words. The identity of the mysterious man was a bit unexpected to Jill. Jill had thought a lot before and thought that the mysterious man should be a talent from Umbrella Company. The one sent by the Lighthouse Country, isn't it Umbrella? Gil thought about which federal agency the person sent would be. Luo Guang looked at Gil, who was thinking, and said, "He wants me to work undercover at Umbrella Company to work for his organization." As for which organization, he didn't say, but he hinted that they know our whereabouts very well. "This is not much different from your original plan. Why didn't you discuss it with me immediately?" The balance in Jill's heart began to tilt towards Luo Guang, wondering if Luo Guang had any difficulties. "He knows that the people who escaped from Raccoon City include me, you, Jill, and Uncle Barry, who flew a helicopter to Raccoon City without following the formal procedures." Luo Guang continued, "With the safety of you two as our priority, Conditions: I serve them, and I warn you not to expose the truth about Raccoon City, especially to the hostile countries of the Lighthouse Country. For the sake of sealing it, and disinfecting Raccoon City, I understand why you think it was sent by the top of the Lighthouse Country. Gil also understood why Luo Guang didn't tell him immediately. This chapter is not over, please click on the next page to continue reading. None of the organizations that participated in the Raccoon City incident are easy to mess with. You know that I will choose to resist this unfairness, especially since you know that the Raccoon City incident is likely to be covered up. Even if you try to persuade me, it will only arouse my anger. Resistance. Gil understood Luo Guang's thinking. One more thing is worse than one less thing. The three of them simply couldn't resist that powerful force, and what the other party wanted Luo Guang to do coincided with what Luo Guang was planning to do, so Luo Guang didn't say anything. This is understandable. But if it was Luo Guang who met him at the beginning, he would definitely have used words to hide these things until the end, as long as Luo Guang thought it was right. At this time, Gil finally confirmed that Luo Guang did not confess because the matter was exposed, and couldn't help laughing. But it doesn't seem to be a bad thing, right? Jill also retracted her whole body into the bed. What the other party asked to do is the same as what you want to do, Luo Guang. Although it threatens you, in the end, it's not a big problem, right? There was still something strange in Jill's mind. I'm worried about you. Luo Guang excluded Barry and said, now what they ask for is still the same as what I planned, but what happens later? What if he threatens me with your life to do something unscrupulous? What's going on? Luo Guang breathed out and said, this is what I'm struggling with. I didn't tell you about this before because I didn't think of a way to get the best of both worlds. If I told you, it would only make you live in fear. On the contrary, I won't say that as long as I complete their mission and I'm still valuable, you won't be threatened by them. Gil turned over and leaned on Luo Guang's shoulder, holding Luo Guang's hand and clasping their fingers tightly. The faint fragrance of Jill provoked Luo Guang's olfactory nerves, causing Luo Guang's body to react slightly. But I would rather know the truth. Gil did not blame Luo Guang for concealing it. Feeling Luo Guang's body temperature, Gil said, no matter what happens, we can face it together. Isn't the same with the entangled goddess of revenge? It's down to the cooperation between us. I know. Luo Guang turned around, hugged Jill, lowered his head slightly, looked at the blush on Jill's face and her small lips like delicious cherries, and kissed her gently. Luo Guang stopped after a brief taste and soon separated, but Gil immediately took the initiative to hug Luo Guang tightly and kissed him. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Evolution begins with Resident Evil. Author, Wei Tongmiao. Chapter 39. Chapter 40. Going to Chicago. It seems that the two have made it clear, and the result is not bad. After putting on his clothes, Barry took a look at the family photo he kept close to him, and consciously walked out of the safe house to kill time in the bar he was familiar with. The next morning, the former office worker Luo Guang woke up on time at 7 o'clock in the morning. Jill was still asleep at this time, breathing slowly and steadily. This sleeping face is really never boring. Luo Guang looked at Jill's relaxed face. It was just plain, but her skin looked very delicate, as if it would be wet with a light touch. Her cheeks were white and rosy, and her small mouth was smiling like a crescent moon, as if she had dreamed of something happy. After feeling the warmth of the lovely girl around him for a while, Luo Guang waited until his body was fully awake, then tiptoed out of bed, covered Jill with a quilt, put on his clothes, and left the bedroom. Luo Guang came to the living room and listened to the movement in Barry's room. At this time, Barry, who came back later, had not gotten up yet, and his snoring was still clearly heard. Luo Guang turned on the water heater first. After a simple breakfast, the water was hot. If Jill needed to take a shower after getting up, she didn't have to wait for the water to heat up. After breakfast and a short rest, Luo Guang put on the clothes in Raccoon City and started a new morning exercise. Under normal circumstances, Luo Guang would choose to start exercising after 8:30 or in the evening, but today Luo Guang didn't want to wake Jill up like last time, so he could only use exercise to vent the desire that Jill had just aroused. Luo Guang first stretched various parts of his body, and after doing warm-up exercises, he put on the backpack he had been using since the crossing and left the safe house. He first ran 5 kilometers outside facing the sun, and then walked back slowly while doing some upper body exercises. When they returned to the safe house, Jill and Barry had already gotten up. After heating up the breakfast prepared by Luo Guang, the two chatted and ate breakfast slowly. This was not the first time Luo Guang went out for morning exercise, so Jill was not surprised. Luo Guang walked to the dining table and handed the newspaper in his hand to Barry. This was the newspaper Barry ordered temporarily. Because it was a trial subscription, the price was very cheap. After Luo Guang went to drink a sip of water, he returned to the dining table and pulled out a chair beside him to sit down. When Jill saw Luo Guang sitting down, he said, "I just told Barry about what I mentioned last night." Jill and Barry were familiar with each other, so Jill helped Luo Guang tell Barry about the stranger. Thank you. Luo Guang and Barry's relationship can only be said to be average, and Jill's words are more convincing. Didn't the other party give you an undercover mission target? Stealing data, collecting information, and subverting personnel? Barry swallowed the sandwich and licked the frosting on his lips and said, "No," and the other party seemed to be sure that I would agree to him. Everything is ready and placed in the safe at the town train station. I just went to pick it up while running. Luo Guang carried a backpack to run because of this. What did the other party give you? Jill asked curiously. Identity, money, a phone, and a piece of paper with contact information and address written on it. Let me contact that person. Luo Guang did not hide anything and took out the things he got one by one. I see that the phone has the contact information of this mobile phone. I will write it down for you later. When you go to Europe in the future, we can also contact each other. Luo Guang knew that the phone given by the other party might have positioning or monitoring functions, but Luo Guang could only use this phone for the time being. As Luo Guang spoke, he wrote down the possibility of mobile phone monitoring on the paper. Jill and Barry nodded when they saw what Luo Guang wrote. Jill took the new certificate that Luo Guang got. It was a driver's license, which looked no different from his previous driver's license. It's actually a driver's license in the special zone. Is the information on it true? Jill wrote down Luo Guang's birthday. The information is true. Luo Guang added in his heart, it's just the information of another Luo Guang. Except for the appearance, the information on it has little in common with Luo Guang before he crossed over. Luo Guang didn't want to bother about age and birthday, and said, in their eyes, the information of Umbrella's intelligence officers is transparent, and they have specially prepared a driver's license for the special zone. Yes, this is a demonstration to you. Jill threw the driver's license back on the table and said. But the other party is really generous. Barry looked at the rolls of big bills that Luo Guang took out, a little envious. It's just a handful of candy after a stick. Jill, do you want to take some? Luo Guang heard Barry's words and thought of Jill going to Europe, so he said. Then I won't be polite, this roll is enough for Barry and me. Jill only took one roll and didn't touch the rest, saying, you also need various funds to do things, just take the rest, don't let others rob you. Understood. Luo Guang thanked Jill for his thoughtfulness. Alas, you two are really considerate, at least be considerate of the uncle who is away from his wife. Barry looked at the two people looking at each other and said with his forehead. Haha. Luo Guang said with a smile, Barry, you said so, but I remember that the waitress in the bar you often went to at night seemed to like you very much and even flirted with you. Wait, Luo, where did you hear the rumor? Rachel and I have a pure friendship. Barry was caught off guard by Luo Guang's sudden attack. Of course, Barry did not do anything to let his family down, but the other party's enthusiasm was enough to make Barry feel troubled. This chapter is not over yet, please click on the next page to continue reading the exciting content. Ha ha ha. Jill also laughed when she heard Luo Guang's counterattack. Suddenly thinking of something, Jill stopped laughing and looked at Luo Guang and asked, "Wait, Luo Guang, why do you know so much?" "Ha ha, yes, Luo, how did you know?" This time it was Barry's turn to laugh. As usual, the three cherished their peaceful life now. The days passed quickly, and after 3 days, they finally welcomed the day of separation. Luo Guang contacted the person on the paper left by the mysterious man 3 days ago in the afternoon. A little unexpectedly, the contact person was a lady with a low voice that seemed to have been processed. The lady, who called herself Miss Emma Greenwell, said that she still had a mission, and asked Luo Guang to take the train to the Lighthouse Country on time 3 days later, which was 4:36 this afternoon. Someone on the train would meet Luo Guang. "I'm leaving." Luo Guang and Jill hugged each other and said. In the distance, Luo Guang had already seen the train coming, on time. "Take care." Jill nodded. The two had done everything they wanted to do in the past few days and had been intimate enough. Luo Guang wanted to say something, but Jill shook her head and said, "If this continues, we won't be able to leave." At this time, besides Luo Guang and Jill, there was only an old couple on the platform. Barry was very sensible and didn't come to see Luo Guang off, leaving time for the two who were parting. Seeing that the train was about to arrive, the old couple slowly stood up, took their suitcases, and walked to the safety line of the platform. Luo Guang glanced at the old couple, then at Jill, and said, "I know, take care of yourself too." The train stopped at the station, and after Luo Guang and Jill kissed goodbye, they looked back every few steps and boarded the train. There were only 3 people in the carriage, including Luo Guang. Luo Guang sorted out his mood, found an empty seat by the aisle, and sat down. Sitting opposite the aisle was the old couple. "Young man, are you going out to work?" the old lady asked kindly in a hoarse voice. "I guess so. What about you? What kind of job is so dangerous that you carry a gun when you go out?" Luo Guang glanced at the old man and said. "Gun?" The old lady seemed very surprised, looking at her lover, or the teammates beside her, and soon found the weapon under his armpit. "You might as well choose a suitcase to carry your luggage." Luo Guang noticed that the old man's arm was unnaturally bent when he took the luggage, as if there was something under his armpit. "Jack, didn't I say that the other party was also in the intelligence business? Why are you still carrying a gun? I should have let you follow me." "Old lady, no," the other party's voice changed, becoming crisp and clean. "I'm worried that you're in danger, and I hid the gun under my armpit because the other party is an intelligence agent." The man with silver hair took off his wig, revealing a head of brown hair, and then tore off the simulated mask on his face with one hand to reveal his handsome face under the mask, looking at the woman with the wronged look. The old woman saw that she couldn't hide it anymore, so she also took off her uncomfortable disguise, revealing her golden wavy hair hidden inside. "I'm Emma Greenwell, and he's my partner Jack Jones." Emma introduced herself as if the previous test had never happened. "Hello." Jones narrowed his eyes and smiled, looking very friendly. The contact person was younger than Luo Guang imagined. It seemed that the other party used a voice changer or other means to make his voice sound much older during the previous mobile phone call. "Let's stop with the boring test. Let's get back to the point. What do you want me to do?" The other party knew Luo Guang's name, so Luo Guang didn't introduce himself, and directly asked the other party about the task he wanted to give him. Luo Guang, are you a man of action?" Emma thought for a while, took out a stack of papers from her handbag, and passed it to Luo Guang directly over Jack. So casual, Luo Guang thought to himself, took the paper, which contained some information about the Chicago branch of Umbrella Corporation, including information about the biological and chemical weapons researched by the company, the list of personnel, the latest dynamics, etc., which were very detailed. You can call the department or organization we belong to X organization, and we are just pawns in the organization. Jack looked frivolous, but he didn't think it was a shame for him to have little experience. He continued, your umbrella company, not to mention a small American branch, even the entire umbrella company is not as powerful as a hair of our organization. And the reason why our organization came to you is that we want you to help us find out about the Chicago branch of Umbrella Corporation. Although Emma's tone was very disgusted with Jack before, she immediately took over Joan's words. The tacit understanding between the two was better than Luo Guang had imagined. The other party's skills were unknown, which made Luo Guang choose to use conversation to understand the situation. I understand, Luo Guang summarized. It means that I will return to the Chicago branch of Umbrella Corporation, and then find an opportunity to steal the company's information and do something similar to corporate espionage. Bingo, Jones snapped his fingers and said, it's such a simple thing. I don't understand why we sent our liaison team to contact you. Because we need information from Raccoon City Greenwell side, and the organization does not want this information to be monitored through means such as phone calls, so it is for us, or to be precise, me to contact them. Also, don't listen to Jack's nonsense. This mission was originally assigned to me alone, so Jack, shut up first. This chapter is not over, please click on the next page to continue reading. Yes, Jack replied nonchalantly, and then leaned back on the chair comfortably. What do you want to know? Luo Guang continued to look at the information in his hand, trying to remember the information about the Chicago branch. The more he looked at it, the more surprised Luo Guang was. The information collected by the other party was too detailed, and even such insignificant things as who had kept many mistresses were clearly investigated. In other words, what is the thing you want to know most? Luo Guang didn't want to tell the other party about a day's adventure in Raccoon City, so he added while looking at the information. Two things, the first is about the Nemesis, especially the battle information, the second thing is, do you know how the Delta State Special Forces lost contact? Although the train had been reserved by her own organization, Emma habitually made sure there was no one else around before asking. Luo Guang was very happy to hear what Emma asked about. He straightened up his fight with the goddess of revenge and told the other party. Luo Guang also specifically gave all the credit for killing the Nemesis to Carlos, a handsome young man. According to Luo Guang, Carlos and Tyrell of UBCS were very brave and brought heavy weapons to help him kill the entangled UBCS Nemesis. It seems that if it can be mass-produced, it will be an ideal super soldier. Emma quickly analyzed the most outstanding advantages of the Furies, which are resistance to beatings and the ability to use human firearms. As for UBCS, the two of them took out the Nemesis, and Emma attributed it to the two's luck in holding heavy weapons such as 4-pack individual rocket launchers. And Emma herself is confident that she can deal with the Nemesis together with Jack under the same conditions. As for the Delta State Special Forces, I have never seen it. Luo Guangke told the other party the answer to another question regardless of the other party's evaluation of the Nemesis. Really, Emma doubted Luo Guang. I have never been to any umbrella company's research institutes in Raccoon City. Those places are too dangerous for an intelligence officer, Luo Guang explained. It seems that Mr. Luo, you know the missions of the Special Forces in Delta State very well, Emma said with a smile. William Birkin, Luo Guang answered with a name. I see, and Emma also understood what Luo Guang meant. Luo Guang was from Umbrella, so he must have known about William Birkin's intention to betray the company with the G virus and the improved T virus. But as a researcher, if William Birkin wanted to continue his research, he would have to find a powerful backer. When he asked about the Delta State Special Forces, Luo Guang thought that the mission of that force was to rescue William Birkin was also normal. However, Emma did not really say that Luo Guang guessed correctly. Special plan. Luo Guang finally found out the real thing that Emma wanted Luo Guang to see, and why Organization X wanted Luo Guang to obtain information from Umbrella Company. Luo Guangzhen wanted to read out the contents of the information in a low voice, but found that this special project only had such a name, without any other information. "This is what our organization needs you to do," Emma said after hearing what Luo Guang whispered and seeing Luo Guang flipping the paper back and forth. "Understood, you don't know the contents of this special plan, so let me get it. Do you have any plans? Or is it that the information is in the Chicago branch?" Luo Guang guessed it when he thought about the detailed information the other party had given him about the Chicago branch. "Yes, after you arrive in Chicago, someone from our Chicago branch of Umbrella will contact you," Emma said. "Wait a minute, you already have an arranger in the Chicago branch, why are you still looking for me? Normally, the fewer people who should know about this kind of thing, the better. There is no need to add another one when the other organization already has an undercover agent. Just find someone to do it. Because even though that person has entered the institute, a receptionist cannot have access to such confidential matters." Jones, who had been keeping silent, couldn't help it and laughed. "The organization spent a lot of money to train that person, and the result is he was a waste, but after the organization spent money on running it, he was still only a receptionist with no hope of promotion. That's the case anyway, that's why we need you, Luo Guang, a senior intelligence officer at Umbrella's Chicago branch. We will also help you cover up your mingling with STARS people, so you don't have to worry about the Chicago branch finding out about your betrayal. Emma Greenwell knows a lot more than Jack Jones, and Luo Guang can get more information from what she says." "Ha!" Luo Guangpi looked at Emma with a smile. Emma was hinting that their organization had been targeting Luo Guang and others since Luo Guang left Raccoon City, and they had evidence of Luo Guang's collusion with former STARS personnel. "It's good that you understand. Do you have any questions or needs? It's almost time to transfer. You go to Chicago. We have other tasks." Emma Greenwell looked at the time and asked. "Questions? Forget it." Luo Guang saw that the other party only revealed a code name of the organization from beginning to end, and he had no intention of asking the other party about the situation of the X organization. "I need money," Luo Guang said. "Money? Didn't I give you a lot before?" Emma frowned and asked. Although the organization was rich, people's greed was unlimited. "But you didn't give me change, all $100 bills, I can't even give a tip." Luo Guang looked at the other party speechlessly, and the contempt in his eyes was very obvious. "I understand, but we don't have any cash on us, so you can figure it out yourself." Emma understood that Luo Guang was not greedy or wanted to bargain with Organization X, and although she had some change on her, she didn't want to spoil Luo Guang. If she gave the money to Luo Guang, her status would be lowered. Okay, Luo Guang was just trying it out, anyway, he wouldn't suffer if he didn't succeed. The matter was almost settled, and the train also began to slow down and stop at the station. In the future, for names like Emma Greenwell, except for dialogue, I will choose Emma in the first half as the name, but in the dialogue, I will still use the name Greenwell in the back according to the relationship, and occasionally use the whole process. If the name doesn't match, meow, tentative. There will be another chapter later, meow. Asterisk. Evolution begins with Resident Evil. Author, Wei Tong Miao. Chapter 40. Chapter 41. Minister Guslin. "Jack, what do you think?" Emma Greenwell asked Jack Jones as she watched him board the train to Chicago. "It doesn't look like much overall, but when you mentioned that he was with STARS, I felt a chill coming from him." Jack was not as careless as he seemed, with all the playful smile on his face. He put it away and answered his partner Emma's question seriously. "I have a hunch, Emma, if you threaten him with things about STARS again, we will definitely suffer." The reason why Jack sat between the two of them was to prevent Luo Guang from sudden violence. Although Luo Guang said that he was an intelligence agent, this did not conflict with being able to fight. You said we can't beat him even if we work together. Emma is still confident in her own skills. I think his gun was on the inside of that black jacket. I saw that when he was looking through information, his right hand kept moving around his waist, Jack said. That's true. And Luo Guang consciously used those materials to block the movements of his right hand. Emma agreed with Jack's statement, but was not willing to be outdone and pointed out Jack's mistake, and if you think the other person doesn't look good, it proves that you also fell into the opponent's scheme. Jack Jones also understood, and was even surprised that he didn't realize that Luo Guang's poor evaluation was contradictory to his strong combat power. He lowered his head and thought, and said, showing weakness to the enemy. How can a senior intelligence officer of Umbrella Company be weak? Emma Greenwell analyzed, and do you think the organization will specially find a weak person to do business? And the treatment of Luo Guang is not bad. Are you saying that the organization plans to recruit the other party and cultivate them intentionally? Jack was a little surprised. Humph, it's very possible. Otherwise, why would the organization send us on an observation mission? Emma made a comeback, snorted and said. Emma Greenwell and Jack Jones are indeed new intelligence agents of Organization X, but they grew up in the organization, and their qualifications and loyalty are higher than many senior intelligence agents in the organization. That's why Organization X arranged for them to perform the task of observing Luo Guang's ability, which can also be called an interview. So Jack, put away your contempt. People who are valued by the organization are not easy to mess with, Emma concluded and said, it's time to go, we have other tasks. After saying that, Emma Greenwell left the current platform without even turning her head, while Jack Jones didn't say anything and directly followed the person he admired. Luo Guang on the other side had a safe journey and got off at a train station in the suburbs of Chicago. The train station here is much more lively than the small town. This is the first time Luo Guang has experienced the bustling and lively side of this world since he traveled to this world. After leaving the train station, Luo Guang saw the contact person Emma Greenwell mentioned at a glance. Wearing a black coat, he held a sign with Luo Guang's name crookedly written on it. Hello, Marcos. Luo Guang smiled broadly and walked up to say hello, still smiling. Get in the car, the other party replied expressionlessly, and then walked directly to the driver's seat to prepare to drive. Luo Guang put his face against Leng's ass, but his expression didn't change much, but he didn't say anything more. The minister can't wait to see you. Marcos glanced at the rearview mirror in the middle of the car and met Luo Guang's gaze. Marcos looked away and opened his mouth, as if he wanted to inquire about something. I'm tired from the ride. Call me when you get there. Luo Guang felt that Marcos was a little strange. It didn't seem like the two people were talking about undercover agents arranged by the X organization. This kind of cold-faced person wants to obtain information at the front desk, a place where he often interacts with people. It can only be said that he is extremely sad. Is it a test for himself? Luo Guang thought so and turned his attention to the scenery of Chicago in 1998 outside the car. Marcos shut his mouth, knowing that his previous cold behavior was annoying, but the reception requirements for him at the research institute were different from what Luo Guang imagined. Talking less was the recruitment standard, and in order to keep my job, I got used to putting on a cold face. There was no words all the way. Under the leadership of Marcos, Luo Guang arrived at the building set up by Umbrella in Chicago. The first floor was a commercial area focusing on business operations, and what Luo Guang was going to was underground in the same building. Graduate school. The border color of the employee card that Marcos took out was different from that of Luo Guang's ID card. His was black, while the other's was white, and there was no profile picture on either card. Marcos used his employee's card to scan it on a scanner before pressing down on the elevator to -8. Arriving at the -8 floor, Luo Guang followed him, passed a disinfection room, and then entered a security room. Luo Guang had his Umbrella Intelligence employee certificate tucked between his chest and back. The security guards who were about to step forward to check if Luo Guang was carrying any contraband took one look at the color of Luo Guang's ID, and were stunned for a moment before looking at Luo Guang again. Luo Guang looked like he suddenly realized what he was doing, and then the security guards all retreated, and no one spoke to Luo Guang. After 2 levels of inspection, Marcos contacted the minister who had previously spoken to Luo Guang through the internal phone at the front desk. Luo Guang, led by Marcos, came to the door of the Biological and Chemical Weapons Research Department of the Chicago Branch Underground Research Institute. Marcos stood still at the door, and then Luo Guang could only go there alone. Luo Guang swiped his card to enter. After entering the door, there was still a corridor to walk. After another disinfection and static electricity elimination, Luo Guang finally arrived at the Biochemical Weapons Research Department. This chapter is not finished yet, please click on the next page to continue reading the exciting content. Although Luo Guang wanted to take a walk to see what this department was currently researching, he finally suppressed his curiosity. According to the sign in the corridor, Luo Guang pressed the doorbell of the director's office of the Biochemical Weapons Research Department. "Come in," a voice came from inside. Luo Guang pushed the door open and went in. The minister's room was smaller than Luo Guang imagined, and there were documents and sundries scattered on the huge desk and on the floor, making the minister's room even more crowded. "Oh, you are finally back. I was worried that you were disinfected in Raccoon City." A middle-aged bald man wearing small glasses behind the desk looked up at Luo Guang and said happily. "Excuse me, does Minister DuPont have anything to do with me?" Luo Guang felt that he had been tricked. He had no idea what the other party wanted to do with him, so he could only knock on him from the side. Fortunately, the intelligence given by Emma Greenwell included information about the other party, Luke DuPont, director of the Biological and Chemical Weapons Research Department of Umbrella's Chicago branch. "Oh, yes." The dark circles under Minister Luke's eyes were serious, as if he hadn't slept for a long time. "I'm looking for you because I want to see the information you collected about the Goddess of Vengeance." Luo Guang was stunned. He didn't expect that the confidential mission he had talked about in front of Captain Victor and Nikolai before was actually such a thing. "What's wrong? Didn't you meet the Nemesis? The tyrant's target is a member of STARS. You are responsible for monitoring one of them, so you should meet him." Minister Luke asked when Luo Guang didn't answer immediately. Luo Guang pulled the chair in front of Minister Luke's desk, sat down, and then said, "I met him. I'm just wondering how to say it and where to start." "Oh, yes, it is true that your intelligence officers see things from a different perspective than our researchers." Minister Luke nodded, understanding the reason for Luo Guang's hesitation, and said, "Why don't we just leave it like this? I'll ask you and answer it." "Okay." Luo Guang could only bite the bullet. "How is the mission of Nemesis completed?" Minister Luke began to play Q\U0026A with Luo Guang. A total of 3 former STARS members appeared in Raccoon City, so the main mission completion rate is 33.33%. Luo Guang also included Uncle Barry to lower the performance of the Nemesis. Only 33.33%? However, there are not many mission objectives, and it is not easy to draw conclusions about the actual ability to complete the mission. After Minister Luke muttered to himself, he continued to ask Luo Guang, "How is the combat performance? It would be best to give a score. Let's take a 5-point scale." Luo Guang shook his head and said, "I think it is stronger than the T-103 mass-produced Tyrant. If the Hunter Beta is used to fight the Tyrant, I think there is no chance of winning, and it cannot be solved by relying on numbers." "Are you saying that the Beta Predator developed by our Chicago branch is not good?" Minister Luke looked a little unhappy, because the Beta Predator is the flagship product of the Chicago Branch Research Institute. "Intellectually, I think the Beta-type hunters are more capable than the Nemesis, but the problem is that with the clothes worn by the Nemesis and various weapons, no matter how many beta predators there are, they will be eliminated. Not the goddess of revenge. Luo Guang explained the reason. I understand what you mean. Minister Luke heard Luo Guang's explanation, and a flash of inspiration flashed in his mind. After sorting out the thoughts in his mind, Minister Luke asked the last question: how was the goddess of vengeance defeated? The first form was blown up by rockets, and then the oil tanker was exploded. Then the second form was directly blown up with a large amount of explosives, and the third form was destroyed by a heavy machine gun. In order to belittle the goddess of revenge, Luo Guang added, what I'm talking about was all caused by a small soldier from UBCS. What? Minister Luke, who seemed unable to open his eyes before, opened his eyes wide for the first time. You can kill the goddess of revenge by yourself. Is this true? Minister Luke's 3 consecutive questions were rewarded by Luo Guang's nod. Luo Guang gave Minister Luke an answer: although there is only one person, the firepower is not low. The first and second forms are equally uncomfortable facing heavy firepower. In the third form, the intelligence of the goddess of revenge is basically gone, directly sent into the muzzle of the heavy machine gun. So although Nemesis is very strong, the T-103 Tyrant, which can be mass-produced now, is enough. It should be defeated when faced with heavy firepower. I understand. After hearing Luo Guang's words, Minister Luke finally understood that biological modification alone was not enough. It must be combined with modern technology to become more powerful. This reminded Minister Luke of the Super Soldier project once led by the military, which enhanced people with advanced weapons and equipment. Ah, that's it? I don't have any other questions. Minister Luke easily fell into his own world, and for a moment he forgot about Luo Guang, who was still waiting for his words. You can go back. I have asked the secretary to pay you. Your card is on. Then I won't bother you. Luo Guang actually wanted to ask what his bank card number was, but this was too strange, and he didn't know the password, so Luo Guang could only say goodbye with tears. Unexpectedly, as soon as Luo Guang went out, he saw a beautiful woman standing opposite the door of Minister Luke's office. She wore a hip-covering short skirt and black stockings, and her tolerant breasts seemed ready to invite you into the urn at any time. Is he Secretary Luke's secretary? Luo Guang thought so, and the other party took action. Hello, I am the secretary to the director of the Virology Research Department. Our director would like to ask you to come over. The beauty walked up to Luo Guang with a smile on her face, shook her chest and said, this chapter is not over, please click on the next page to continue reading. I have a wife. After Luo Guang thought about Jill's fist, he calmed down and motioned for the other party to lead the way. Speaking of which, those research-mad ministers who do research every day actually find beautiful women as their secretaries. Can your body bear it? Minister Luke also called his secretary a female name, so Luo Guang had such an evil guess. There is close cooperation between the two departments, so the Virology Research Department is built next to the Biological and Chemical Weapons Research Department. Minister, I brought you here. The beautiful secretary pressed the doorbell of the minister's room. Come in. Please come in. The beautiful secretary opened the door and invited Luo Guang in. Wendy, come in and make 2 cups of coffee. Luo's taste is the same as mine. The director of the Virology Research Department is an elegant and easygoing old man named Ghislain Dennis. Okay Wendy, the beautiful secretary, walked in front of Luo Guang. Does it look good? Minister Ghislain saw Luo Guang lowering his head and glanced at his secretary's buttocks. Not bad. Although Minister Ghislain was over 60 years old, he was still a man after all, so Luo Guang did not shy away and replied honestly. Yes, but Luo, you'd better not hit her. She's sent from above. Minister Ghislain looked very familiar with Luo Guang. Because of William Birkin. Minister Ghislain took the initiative to talk about the secretary. There is a high probability that the beautiful secretary is new here. Luo Guang, who is familiar with Minister Ghislain, does not know him. Thinking about what Minister Guslin said, Luo Guang immediately understood the above. The reason for this. Umbrella Company arranges a beautiful secretary for these senior researchers or high-level personnel, which is not only for surveillance, but also a beauty trap prepared by Umbrella Company for those bachelors. No wonder it smells like a fox. Jill is better, unlike those coquettish bitches outside. Luo Guang thought as he sat opposite Minister Guslin. Luo, you seem to have become a little different. Minister Guslin did not immediately explain why he called Luo Guang Lei, but instead talked about family matters. What's different? Luo Guang asked. According to the Peeping Diary, Luo Guang could only confirm that Luo Guang from Umbrella Company was a sullen pervert. Well, if it were before, you would probably just nod your head and not say what you were thinking. Minister Guslin just said it based on his feelings. I have experienced too much in Raccoon City. The environment will change a person, especially after experiencing life and death difficulties. Luo Guang's acting skills were on the line, a haze flashed in his eyes, and his thoughts seemed to have returned to Raccoon City. I'm sorry, I also heard about what happened in Raccoon City, so I can understand why you didn't come back immediately after completing the mission, but went on vacation. Minister Guslin pulled Luo Guang back from his thoughts. Then a black work ID card popped out from the desk drawer and was thrown in front of Luo Guang, and he continued, just throw away your work ID card, the one from the Raccoon City branch. Anyway, the research institute in Raccoon City was destroyed, and the branch it's also disbanded, so there's no need for you to be undercover there. Luo Guang did it and replaced it with a new work permit. As for the old one, Luo Guang planned to find a place to dispose of it separately. Ding dong. The doorbell rings. Minister, the coffee is ready. Secretary Wendy said outside the door. Bring it in. Minister Guslin replied. After Wendy placed the coffee in front of the two of them, she exited the office obediently. Luo Guang picked up the coffee and took a sip. It was bitter and not sour. It tasted surprisingly similar to the refreshing coffee Luo Guang drank before traveling through time. You can tell why you called me here, right? Luo Guang put down his coffee cup and asked. Danforth City, do you know this place? Minister Guslin took a sip of hot coffee and slowly said a city name that Luo Guang had never heard of in the Resident Evil game. Thank you all for your support. Meow. Asterisk.